Hi, everybody. It's David Wildstein. I'm the editor of the New Jersey Globe. This is our annual pre-election live stream Nerd Fest. It's one of my favorite nights of the year because I get to hide behind three people that are much smarter than I am. So it's Micah Rasmussen, the director of the Rebovich Institute of New Jersey Politics at Rider University, Joey Fox, the Washington reporter for the New Jersey Globe, and Zach Blackburn, the Trenton reporter for the New Jersey Globe. And we're going to talk about tonight's election. But I'll tell you where I think I want to start. And I'll start with you, Micah, because you and I are much older than the other two, and we've seen a lot more governor's races. This one seems to have been going on for a very long time. I mean, this is the longest governor's race I ever remember.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you have to remember that the four of us were involved in putting on that first set of debates in February with the Republicans and the Democrats. And that was a major event to organize, to put on. And it really kicked off the campaigns, I think, unofficially. And we were very happy to do that at Rider, of course. But we all have been at this ever since. And they've sort of been going at it ever since. And, we went right from the primary into the general. The general has been very much a slugfest, right? Some people would call it a race to the bottom, and a lot of return fire back at each other. And I think there's a general feeling among all of us who are watching, and probably the campaigns themselves, it's time to have the election.
Yeah. Joey, I don't remember if you were there or not that Friday, but when, Jack Ciattarelli announced for this race when he conceded his defeat 4 years ago.
I was. His concession speech happened to come when I was visiting friends at college. At the college I just graduated 6 months earlier, and so I was eating lunch with them while also having headphones in, trying to listen to Jack Ciattarelli's concession speech and listening to him say, "And I'm running again in 2025." And we're like, "Oh shit, I'm gonna have to go and write a story about this and deal with this now in the middle of this." And yeah, it's been truly nonstop ever since. We've sort of slowly seen candidates get added to the field since then. I mean, Steve Fulop also joined the race really, really early on in the cycle. And then even candidates who, had much shorter runways, like Mikey Sherrill, who only got in after last November's elections. She's still been running for this for a year straight. And if you count all the behind the scenes time, it's been years and years. So, I mean, it's an exhausting process for everyone involved to become the governor of New Jersey. I think that you see candidates every year who step up kind of at the last minute and think, well, I can make it on the ballot just the same as anybody. I can, raise some money from friends just the same as anybody. What's really the difference? But the difference is that the people who are likely to be the politicians in real positions of power are people who have been preparing for that day for a long while beforehand.
And Zach, I don't even want to ask where you were for my first governor's race, but just to put it into some perspective, that was the year Brendan Byrne ran for the first time. And he literally shows up at the State House. That's, the Secretary of State, everything was at the State House, walks in, files his letter of resignation as a Superior Court judge, walks out into the rotunda with a ton of State House reporters who were there anyway, because that's where they went to work every day, and announced that he was running for governor. That was the end of April 1973. By June, he had won a decisive victory in the primary. And I don't know, Zach, before we get into this year's race, could that ever happen again?
Oh, well, no, not. I think it depends on who it is. Like if Mikey Sherrill had joined the race in February or March, it still might have been might have still been able to nab something. But I don't think I would recommend that necessarily, to say the least. But I wasn't around back then, so I can't speak on that strategy.
Yeah, what you should say is you weren't really paying close attention to New Jersey politics in 1973. So
yeah, I wasn't paying attention to a lot of things back then.
So look, all four of us are asked. I don't even want to count how many times a day. What's going to happen?
We know, but we're not going to tell you.
Yeah.
That's our answer.
I look at it, we all look at it through our own lenses, and I sort of imagine, is Moses going to descend from the mountains holding tablets that give you the winners of the election? And the answer is probably not, but it's Jersey, so anything could really happen here. But I think it's probably best if we don't predict, because I don't think any of us really know. But let me ask the three of you. I mean, Joe, you go first. Do you think this is a close race?
I think this is a competitive race, and I think that might not be synonymous with close. Sometimes you can go into an election knowing that both parties really are hotly contesting it, knowing that, millions upon millions of dollars have been spent on both sides, knowing that both parties have a lot of money, but also, just sort of attachment and political stakes invested in this race. But none of that necessarily portends what the result is going to be. I think we're looking at, and we said not to predict, so this prediction is going to be so vague as to be basically irrelevant. I think we're looking at a band of reasonable outcomes here that spans from maybe Chitterelli +3 to Sherrill +12. That's obviously an enormous band. Again, borderline useless, but just sort of to get our heads in terms of where the window is. And then, you can take the middle of that average and be like, okay, well, maybe that's where it's going to land. And maybe it is, but I'm sort of trying to give us more of I think that both parties would not hugely disagree with that window. Republicans might want to shift it a little bit away from the Sherrill +12 realm. But this is a race that I don't think anybody is going to look back on and say, well, wow, that was actually really easy. Like we won in a landslide anyways. It didn't really matter. But I also would not completely rule out the possibility that, New Jersey is still a blue-leaning state. This is a Donald Trump midterm. Democrats might just kind of win it.
Let me go to Zach on that same one. Where do you?
Yeah, I don't want to crib too much off Joey's answer, but like if, I just don't want to step on primary discussion already, but Mikey Sherrill won the primary by a margin that I don't think people would say was very, very close. I mean, it was what, 14, 16 points, somewhere in that. But I don't think anyone would pretend that it wasn't competitive. And so, yeah, I mean, if it turns out that we get to election day and it's called within 30 minutes, just like the primary was, maybe that's not close, but people are trying and the money suggests that it's competitive. So,
yeah.
And we've obviously got to look at 2021, right? I mean, that's just sort of, I think that both for Republicans' optimism and Democratic kind of hand-wringing, the specter of 2021, where Democrats were projected to win relatively easily, and then it ended up being pretty tight. They lost a bunch of legislative seats. It just ended up looking like kind of a disaster for them. I think that's looming large in both parties' imaginations and in reporters like our imaginations. I think everyone feels like we sort of missed the train a little bit then, everyone except for Jack Chitterelli, who was clearly on the train. And there is a pretty concerted effort, both by the parties to really get involved, by journalists to pay really close attention, by the candidates to, sort of campaign like all get out. We're all operating off of the last gubernatorial election we saw. And I think that is sort of, you can see it shadowed in the way that everyone is behaving about this year.
Yeah. I mean, it's not that many hours ago, 5 something this morning, I did the Inside Edge, and it was like, like let's just stop looking at all the data now and wait till Tuesday. And then, we had 3 polls come out today. And
I think 4. There was a Fox News poll as well.
6 if you include SoCal from late last night. No, you've got Fox, YouGov, Quinnipiac, Emerson, SoCal, and Suffolk.
Yeah, and I'm not sure about. I tried to look up some background on SoCal, and
Well, all right, but yeah.
I mean, I'm dubious of these anyway, as everybody knows. But you start to look at some. There's a wide range of them, and you start to look at some of the the averages. So the 3 that I was looking at, which was Emerson, Suffolk, and Quinnipiac, all decent pollsters. Came up with a range, an average of of 4.5, and that doesn't seem crazy, but it's hard to look at where these turnout models are. Adam Geller, who is the Chitterelli pollster, said, wait a minute, on Quinnipiac, they don't work off a voter list. They call and ask for people to self-identify themselves. He said, so that's don't even put that in there. It's sort of flawed. Is the instinct right of just, should these campaigns, Micah, should they just assume that that it's dead even right now and pull out no stop? I mean, not pull out every stop that they can to make sure they get across the finish line.
Well, I think they have to run that way, and I think they are running that way, and I think that's what gives us, who are so close to this race, anybody who's following this race closely, it's what gives us pause. I mean, Joey talked about the ghost of 2021. Listen, we have a front runner who 6 out of the 6 polls today, and all of the polls for the entirety of the campaign are showing the same front runner. And we talked about that as a talking point in the primary, that every poll had shown Mikey Sherrill ahead. And we like to look at trends rather than individual polls. So I think we have to contend to that, and we have to reckon with that. But it certainly hasn't meant that Chitterelli has let up on the gas. It certainly hasn't meant that he hasn't been a very high quality candidate. And that's part of what makes it hard for us to discern what's going on. Nobody's letting up, nobody's letting off, and everybody's going to run through the tape here. And that's what an election should be. And that's part of what makes this election in particular so exciting. But again, I do see some points of consensus in this remarkable day of polling where we've gotten, whatever you want to call it, 5 or 6 public polls. You've got the same front runner in all of them. You've got the same front runner over 50% in all but one of them. And you've got the same person who's showing a lead of over 5% in all but 2 of them. So there is some consensus there. They're not quite all over the map, really. We can look hard enough and we can see some points in common.
I mean, I can't recall a governor's race where it was won by somebody who had never ever been in the lead before. McGreevey against Whitman in '97, may have been the one where it came closest without him ever having had a lead. But then again, polling is not what it used to be. So, I sort of question it. I might, I'm sure, I know there's people who agree with me and there's people who don't agree with me. And that's just, I guess that's the way it always is. But Joey, I want to go to you now, just talking about layout for me. Start with, whoever you want, but tell me where they have to do well. What do they have to excel at in order to make sure to secure a win on Tuesday?
So I'm going to put up a couple of maps. I'm gonna have to toggle between them because they're not on the same page. But let's see. Okay, so here, so basically we've had 2 relatively close New Jersey statewide elections, both Democratic wins in the last few years, both of which made a lot of headlines and have had a lot of ink spilled over them. This one, obviously, there's the 2021 governor's race where Phil Murphy won by 3 points. And then there's the 2024 presidential race where Kamala Harris won by a little under 6 points. And the way I've been kind of thinking about this race is, these are 2 different coalitions of New Jersey. You've got this Harris versus Trump map that has fairly blue suburbs, very blue cities as always, but the cities are definitely less blue than they used to be. And then you've got, I realize it's tiny on this map, but if you zoom into places like Kearney or Passaic County, some real Democratic weakness, especially in majority minority and especially in Hispanic areas. And then the 2021 map, that urban core, that sort of diverse urban core is definitely stronger. Phil Murphy overperformed Kamala Harris by, I don't know, like 30 or 40 points in some of those types of towns, like in Hudson County and in Passaic County. But then outside of that band of urban strength, you get a lot weaker. Phil Murphy did terrible pretty much all across South Jersey. he really faltered in Morris County, Hunterdon County, Somerset County compared to your average Democratic presidential candidate. Chitterelli was able to sweep up a ton of sort of moderate suburban support that wouldn't vote for Donald Trump, but is willing to vote for someone like Jack Chitterelli, even though now Jack Chitterelli in this campaign is very supportive of Trump. But obviously both these were
Joey, let me interrupt you for a second.
Yeah.
This is also the race where Monmouth and Ocean are really starting to pile on just huge numbers, right? Where it's just not even competitive anymore.
Right. Yeah. But at the end of the day, both of these, and so, both of these races caused Democrats a lot of heartburn, but at the end of the day, they were also still Democratic victories. If Jack Chitterelli were to repeat either of the coalitions in either of these maps, he would still lose. It would still be, a pretty solid result for a New Jersey Republican, but it'd still be a Governor Sherrill. He would lose the governor's race for a third time. It wouldn't exactly be what Republicans are looking for. So he has to find ways to either combine these coalitions, but I think I've never done the actual math on this. Turnout really makes it hard. Like you'd have to compare completely unequal turnout levels. But my guess is that if you did the complicated calculations where you basically took the best result out of the 2021 and 2024 races for Republicans, that sort of Frankenstein election would be a Republican victory. So theoretically, that's what Jack Chitterelli is aiming for, right? He wants to replicate all of the suburban support he got and Ocean County and Monmouth County support he got in 2021, while also matching Trump's gains in urban areas from 2024. And I think that there are a couple of places where he can reasonably build on his past coalitions. One place that we've talked about a lot is Lakewood, where sort of the high-level Orthodox Jewish leaders in Lakewood were against him last time, which really blunted his momentum there. And now they're fully for him, and he's probably going to get like 10,000 extra votes just from that alone. There's North Bergen, where Nick Sacco, kind of on his revenge tour against the Hudson County Democratic apparatus, is now on Team Chitterelli, and that's probably going to net him some votes in North Bergen.
Dozens and dozens of them, yeah.
Say it again.
Dozens and dozens of them.
Well, I mean, that will be genuinely interesting. North Bergen is a town that went heavily for Murphy, and then in the 2024 presidential race, it revealed that it's actually not so much of a Democratic town anymore. There's a lot of voters there who are maybe on the more conservative end, just voted for Democrats out of instinct for a while and are now we're at least tentatively on the Trump train. I'll be really interested to see whether the combination of that and the Sacco backing can actually make that town competitive this year. But anyway, that's getting really granular into one specific town. But just in general, Chitterelli needs to be looking at these two coalitions that came close but didn't quite get there and see whether he can combine them. And there's some areas where he definitely won't be able to, right? I don't think that he is going to do as well in Morris County. He won Morris County by, I believe, 11 points in 2021.
Right. About 21,000 votes. Yeah, 11.
I would be really surprised if he meets that again this year, because he's running against a congresswoman who has represented most of Morris County for the last 7 years. That's just going to be, I think he could still win Morris County. I think that that's more likely than not. But, getting that 11-point margin there, maybe not so much. So this has been very rambling. And I'll let other people sort of pick up on the various threads of it. But basically, if I'm Jack Chitterelli, I'm looking at these two maps and thinking about how can I match these results and where are the few areas where I can reasonably do better than I've ever done, maybe better than Donald Trump ever did, and just, get my voters to the polls and break this Democratic coalition.
You did that was a great analysis, and I think you highlighted the real problem when you said, this is like a Frankenstein map and you've got to merge state election with a federal election. And that really highlights this problem. It's a discrete problem. You'd like to have, okay, can I just get those 600,000 Trump-only, presidential-only voters to come out this year in a non-presidential election? That's a great universe. You know who you've got to work with. The trick is, can you get enough of them to come out in a non-presidential year? And if you can, then he's cooking. That's really, I think, the primary challenge he's facing. How many of them can he get out? That's the key to places where he'd love to be competitive. Passaic County, as you mentioned, those parts of Hudson County that were for Trump last time. Can he do it? Can he do it at a time where he's wrapping his arms around Trump, clearly to try and get them, but maybe that alienates other people who are not so high on Trump this year? It's really tough to merge the state election and the federal election. We've talked about that all year.
Right. And how many of those people who turned out in 2024 are people who are, barely paying attention to a presidential election, let alone being willing to turn on a gubernatorial election? And, we don't know. I've seen polls that show it. I've always been sort of generally suspicious of polls of individual ethnic groups, because I feel like you look at them and then you look at the election results and they oftentimes don't seem to match up at all. But, the polling that we have of Hispanic voters in the wake of the 2024 election shows that a lot of the people who may have voted for Trump in 2024 have sort of turned off of him again. So even if you were to get, those infrequent voters out of Patterson or Passaic out to the polls again, there's no guarantee that they're all going to be for Jack Ciattarelli, right? Like, the local power structures there are all heavily behind Cheryl. They're all going to be, trying to get people to vote straight ticket Democrat. That's sort of what these towns are accustomed to. That's a very tricky needle for Ciattarelli to thread, to try to get these towns that just do not have GOP infrastructure, do not have that muscle memory to both turn out for him.
One of the things that struck me in the Suffolk poll, and I know I started out the day earlier this morning by saying, stop delving into all of this, yet, here I am and I'm doing it. But so that's a poll that is statistically tied. Cheryl's 4 points up, 4-point margin of error. And that's Cheryl leading by 4 points with Bergen County tied. Now, Phil Murphy won Bergen County by almost 6 points. The margin was around 16,000. If Bergen County is really tied, and if assumes that I believe a poll of that had a sample of 300 voters in the large, in a county where you typically poll it on its own with so many different kind of communities. I mean, a 300 sample. I don't know if they in Bergen County if they oversampled South Bergen, or undersampled, some of the towns in the 39th and we don't know that kind of granular detail. But Micah, if Bergen's really in play in this governor's race, just based on institutional knowledge, what does that tell you, or what does it make you think?
Oh, it makes me think that he's running very successfully with blue collar work, the blue collar workers he's been targeting, the blue collar towns that he's been targeting. It tells me that some of the legislative seats are in play as well. It tells me that he's probably doing better in other places like that as well, like probably Middlesex. So it would be, I think, part of a larger trend. Bergen is a big enough headache for Cheryl as it is, but I think it would pretend that other areas are perhaps in play as well.
So that's I just want to sort of sum it up. We didn't really hit too much down south, but Ciattarelli needs to and tell me if in any of these points, once I list them, if any of the three of you disagree with me, you could also tell me if you agree. That's okay too. But Ciattarelli's got to cut into that Bergen number. He's maybe maybe even sort of swap out every vote he loses in Morris County. He could potentially make them up in Bergen. He needs to flip Passaic. But eventually all this, I think, comes down to what's his turnout going to be in Monmouth? What's it going to be in Ocean? If you look at the map, the redder parts, is he going to really dominate in their smaller counties, but Sussex, Warren, Hunterdon, is going to win Gloucester by a little more than he did. And to me, this race, and this may be like an old game plan, but is it possible that this race comes down to Middlesex County again, and the ability of Ciattarelli to peel? But he's not going to win Middlesex. Mikey Sherrill is going to win Middlesex County, but Woodbridge was what, Joey, basically tied last time. Yeah. Does he have to pick up votes in Woodbridge and in Edison and Monroe and sort of, is that going to be? I think that might be the key to his ball game, is that he's got to narrow the gap in Middlesex County.
My instinct is to be skeptical of any. Trying to phrase this in a polite way, because I'm not actually trying to bring the hammer down on you here. If a candidate wins by 3 votes, then and 500,003 to 500,000, then every single one of those 500,003 votes was equally important, in the sense that, you know, Chitterelli is going to try to chip away at the margins in every possible town he can. And I think that, let's say, if he's flipping Monroe Township from 2021, then that is probably going to be part of a broader statewide trend compared to 2021 versus Chitterelli really appealing to the voters of Monroe Township. So I wouldn't necessarily localize. I think that there's a couple of places where you can actually localize. Lakewood is the big one. I'll come back to that, because that is, like, you know, an endorsement worth thousands upon thousands of votes, flipping from Phil Murphy to Jack Chitterelli. That is sort of a concrete area where you can say, okay, if Phil Murphy wins by 7,000 votes, sorry, if Jack Chitterelli wins by 7,000 votes and he got 13,000 in Lakewood, then yeah, sure, maybe you can attribute it to that. But otherwise, I would be sort of skeptical to lay this election at the feet of any one town or county.
Yeah. Zach, what do you think? I mean, you're living in one of the swing towns. I don't want to give out personal identifiers or anything.
Wait,
but
Zach, you got to show the mail that
the
are using to try to get you to.
Oh, Tom Malinowski, I know announced some of this, but I'm receiving lots of different mail, including the Stop New Jersey Democrats.
Yeah.
It's just we got to invent a new criminal statute to prevent New Jersey.
New Jersey Democrats are ruining my life. But yeah, I agree with Joey. Like, if turnout is boosted in places like Essex County and Newark, and you know, unexpectedly maybe, like, you know, turnout boosts unlike it does in normal off-year elections, then Middlesex just might not be important, and at the end of the day, it might not be like a bellwether swing boost type of county. I don't know. I also hesitate to just say that, like, it relies on one little, like, county, one little town, especially when it's just down to voter persuasion and turnout at that point.
Yeah.
And when we're in an era where elections are fought, I mean, you know, this election is still being fought on local state issues, and there are certain towns that might react to those issues in certain ways unique to what's going on there. Like, I sort of think about the whole hullabaloo in Cranberry, where there was the family farm that got saved. I don't know how voters in that relatively small town are thinking about it, and how that might be different from, you know, another town of the same demographics and the same partisanship. But at the end of the day, voters are all going to be reacting to kind of the same ads, the same messages, the same signals here. And I would be surprised if different parts of the state react super differently to it.
See, I don't know. We this is what's good about when we all get together, is we don't all walk lockstep with each other. I think if Chitterelli can't make dents into Bergen, he can't lose Bergen by 16,000 votes again, and he can't lose Passaic by 4,000 again, and he can't lose Middlesex by 26,000 again, and necessarily expect to win the race. So I think, I look at those as large counties where he's got to chip away. He could pick up 10 points in Cape May with a bigger turnout. And that's not as good as turning South Bergen. And I see Morris County as an obstacle there. But, Micah, it looked like you wanted to get in, so let me give you some time.
I think there's probably a middle ground here, which is that there are towns. I haven't seen any evidence, as good as his campaign has been, that it's so granular that he's running a different campaign in one town than another,
no,
right?
That's true.
We're targeting demographics. We're targeting Democrats. We're targeting Republicans. We're targeting, I think there are towns that run together. There are types of voters that run together. So I could see a Hamilton and a Monroe voting similarly. I could see, if a Garfield running, in that category. I could see those kinds of trends, but I haven't seen the kind of town by town. Maybe you're seeing it and I'm not, but I think it's been more types of voters, more types of issues that they're going to respond to, demographics. That we're targeting specific kind of voters around kind of issues rather than voters of a specific town.
Yeah. Let me let you go. Unfortunately, something you said, Micah, has triggered Alexa. So Alexa's trying to answer your questions for you. So
can I leap in while you're trying to solve whatever that is?
It's solved. I pulled the plug right out of the thing. It's a very person who grew up, born in the 1960s. That's the solution. Unplug it and move on. So,
right. Well, I'm glad you figured it out.
Yeah.
We've been sort of talking about Jack Ciattarelli almost like he's the protagonist of this election, but he's not. I mean, or he's the
I agree.
The dual protagonist along with Mikey Sherrill. And her campaign is obviously thinking about this electorate too, and how to take what is already sort of a light blue electorate and at minimum keep it light blue, and if possible, sort of expand on that further. And so I would imagine that her campaign is looking at this 2024 map and saying, okay, realistically, given the way that voters vote in state level elections versus federal, we're probably going to lose a bit of altitude in Hunterdon County, in Somerset County, in maybe even Morris County, even though that's Cheryl's, sort of home turf. Towns that voted for Kamala Harris, like Delaware and Hunterdon, or the Mendhams and Morris, that's a tough lift for a state Democrat. I don't know the last time that a Democratic gubernatorial candidate won those towns, but it's been a long time, I would imagine. And so that, maybe costs you a few points. You start to fall a bit, and that gets you a little dangerous because you're already only at a 5.8 point victory. But then you start to look for areas where I think that Micah Sherrill is near guaranteed to do better than Kamala Harris. Union City, I mean, that one feels like the easiest one because you've got Brian Stack fully engaged on her behalf. Union City voted for Harris by something like a 16 or 17 point margin, 15. It wasn't that high. It was surprisingly low. That's sort of, Brian Stack has these incredible get out the vote abilities, but when it comes to a presidential election, that's a little bit beyond his grasp. People are getting their information about those elections completely independently of what their mayor says.
Right.
And he doesn't.
And by the way, Joey, if I can interrupt you for a second on Stack, just because I can answer this. Every 4 years, Stack doesn't tell voters how to vote.
Right. In part because he knows that that's sort of not entirely within his, it's not part of his role as mayor.
Right.
But he's definitely engaged for Sherrill. So I think that margin is going to explode in Union City and probably West New York, because that's sort of become part of the Union City expanded cinematic universe. But then, City of Passaic, Kearney, Bayonne, Patterson, north and east wards of Newark, Perth Amboy. Most of these places are majority Hispanic. These are all places where Kamala Harris had kind of a historically abysmal performance. And first of all, the Sherrill campaign is very actively, trying to get Democratic numbers back up there, and local leaders are too. And second of all, the way that these elections tend to work is a presidential election is sort of the leading edge, and it shows where a town is maybe going. But then the following, state level elections or congressional elections probably recede from that a little bit, because a lot of those voters who just voted for a Republican for president in this case, either maybe don't turn out to the polls in an off year or aren't quite ready to sort of become full on down the line GOP voters yet. So that I feel like is kind of the Sherrill calculus of, do our best to match the Harris coalition, or even better than that, the Biden coalition in the suburbs, understand that we're probably going to lose some voters here and there because there are just some voters who are still pretty convinced that a Republican in the governor's office is the better way to go in New Jersey, even if they don't like Donald Trump. But then win those votes right back in all of the urban majority minority areas that Harris specifically kind of cratered in.
Yeah. And look, in complete fairness, Mikey Sherrill's not Kamala Harris, and totally different people, different circumstances, different opponent. We look at presidential numbers sort of as guidance as to, where the town, where somebody would be under that circumstance, which is, apples and oranges, I think, to a governor's race. She's got a certain draw on her own that's undeniable. So does Chitterelli, and they are the two of them different than Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. So I think we should just sort of look at presidential races, and it's easy for me to say because 10 minutes after this live stream's over, I'm going to be looking at presidential numbers somewhere to try and figure something out. But the reality is, I think national election results are merely advisory as you look at gubernatorial, but not necessarily the same roadmap.
Cheryl, I think, is interesting. She is unusual compared to a lot of prior Democratic nominees in New Jersey in that she has like a distinct geographic base, right? Something like it's a little more than 1/12 because the district got changed pretty heavily. So there's some voters who used to be in the district and who aren't anymore. But a little bit less than a tenth of the state has already been represented by Cheryl in Congress, and a bunch of the people who haven't have still seen her TV ads when she's run for re-election to Congress and things like that. Phil Murphy and John Corzine, when they each came into the governor's office, and then Corzine lost in 2009. Phil Murphy had his close call in 2021. They didn't really have coherent geographic bases. That wasn't their original path to politics. It wasn't the strategy they pursued. And I think that you saw that a little bit with Murphy, where, in 2021, his support was really, he could overperform Joe Biden in a couple of towns like Union City, where Brian Stack was really engaged on his behalf, but he didn't have anywhere where, voters just liked Phil Murphy specifically so much that he could trust to have a little bit of a cushion. And Cheryl has a little bit of a cushion. She has a group of voters that might not consider voting for any Democrat but her. Not a huge number, probably, but a decent enough chunk that's, a real factor in this election, is that she is an individually strong candidate who has proven herself very capable of winning elections in the past and has a coherent base to build off of.
Yeah. And that's sort of what makes this difficult, I think, in terms of Frankensteining an electorate for Chitterelli, is that he's not Trump. And when you're trying to build a lasting statewide coalition that can win you gubernatorial races, you're the ideal candidates to help you build that electorate aren't the low propensity voters who just swing for Trump in one year and then don't come out the next. And so I think we saw a lot of that last year, and that's just one of the biggest obstacles.
But Chitterelli obviously does have something of a statewide base because he ran 4 years ago and was on every single state voter's ballot. So he does, compared to, say, if Bill Spadea was nominated, and then a whole bunch of the state would have to learn who the hell Bill Spadea is for the first time. Chitterelli is one of the most known entities in New Jersey politics, and that probably gives him at least a little bit of a solid cushion as well.
So, Micah, I want to ask you this because we all draw upon the history and looking back. And this is not unique to Mikey Sherrill. This is involving recent Democratic statewide campaigns. That urban turnout, that bankable number, has not been there for a very long time. Right. And whether it's Newark or Patterson or Elizabeth or they're
Trenton, Camden, Atlantic City, all of them. Yeah.
Trenton. I mean, Trenton especially. Yeah. Is these are cities where Democrats should be winning. I don't know, like nearly all the votes. Right. But if they don't turn out, you can't deposit them in your account.
Well, before you start, Micah, I put up the primary map to show how a lot of those cities that we're talking about, you can see, most of this map on the left is green because Mikey Sherrill won most of the state. But a lot of the areas where she did not win are Camden, are Trenton, are Newark, are Jersey City, are all of the big urban areas that we're sort of talking about as points of concern here and that opted for other primary candidates.
What really drove it home for me this year was a reporter asked me to do some of that historical work. Mm-hmm. And it turns out that presidential level turnout in the cities is twice what it is in non-presidential years. It's twice what it is in gubernatorial years. So, you could have a pretty healthy, surprisingly healthy turnout in a city, 50%. And, the very next year it's 25%. And so this is, and this is not just one city. This is a trend across the state with every city. And so how do you defy that? How do you get out of that long-term trend? Well, I'll tell you, the best case scenario for Mikey Sherrill is the cities where there are mayoral elections, like Jersey City, because that turnout with all those races, they're going to take care of themselves. Yeah. That turnout right from the bottom up, or from Hoboken. But we don't have that in every city, obviously. So that's not going to be the gift that you're going to have in Newark, for example. And look, there are no shortcuts. And I've been saying this for a long time. Democrats have gotten rusty at the turnout machine. And you all at the Globe have reported on the low turnouts for the off elections in Newark. They're either going to, crank up the rusty machine, or they're not. And I think in some of the wards, there are some signs, Leroy Jones areas, the areas that he really can, they're going to be cranking. I think the question is what's going to happen in the other wards and what's going to happen in the other cities. When you look at Camden's vaunted VBM machine, it's great in the suburbs. That's a suburban machine, always has been a suburban machine. The level of participation in the city itself is abysmal. It's in line with the other cities across the state.
And so, it takes a significant infrastructure to turn urban votes out. I mean, and last week, Sherrill turned, within the last 2 weeks, I think she's turned a real corner on Black voters in New Jersey. The Reverend Boyer, who I believe is sort of the leader of that for guys, my age. I don't think New Jersey's had a singular person who can move people since Reverend Reginald Jackson was running the Black Ministers Group, but I look at it, and it took a long time for 165 Black ministers to come out and endorse Mikey Sherrill. This probably would have been done in most cases. Phil Murphy had those, set a year earlier. This is late. This is what I'm going to be looking for on election day is when those reports start coming out during the day. We're going to be looking at urban areas. And there's only so many times in a day, and this is going to be the same for Chitterelli in his core areas where people say, well, our voters, they come out late. That's always the spin, right? When the numbers aren't there, it's, well, they weren't supposed to be there this early. They were supposed to be coming out. They're supposed to come at the end. So don't worry about it. There's nothing to worry about. Everything's good. But I think that's what we're going to watch, right? We're going to watch and see if urban turnout is noticeable during the day. Zach, what happens in the Sherrill campaign if they're not seeing good crowds in the urban areas?
I mean, it's hard to just prescribe an outcome there. It's not what they want to see. I think enthusiasm is one of the biggest question marks going into this. It took a few months for Mayor Baraka to endorse Mikey Sherrill. Some of that was for progressive reasons rather than necessarily like racial or certain reasons, although a lot of those reasons are interconnected. But we're just like, we're not seeing a lot of immediate embrace of Sherrill among, like you mentioned, some of the Black minister groups. The working family parties hasn't endorsed her technically, although they are sending money her way. And there's just sort of a half embrace of Sherrill, a late embrace of Sherrill. And it to a certain extent, it's matching a lot of her campaign messaging, which is, I can stop Donald Trump, but Jack Chitterelli won't. And that is a lot of the reasoning for why, Mayor Baraka signed on and endorsed her late. And why the Working Families Party is sending money to her late, rather than her proactive vision for the state, which, if there is an enthusiasm problem, you might see it in some of these urban areas, and you might see it in places where people are endorsing her, but endorsing her later than you might have expected or hoped if you're the Cheryl campaign. And so, it's impossible to know without numbers, but if there's an issue, it might pop up there.
I'll also say that I think that there are some evidence, and there is some evidence. There are some numbers to show that her campaign is mobilizing the urban vote in the early vote. And I think they're doing it in a way that's sort of mirroring 2024 turnout in the early vote. So I think they're doing what they can. When you get to election day, it may or may not be a completely different story, but they are cranking out. The VBMs are strong, and the in-person early votes are strong in Essex, in Newark, in Hudson. These are areas where the turnout is almost as strong right now as at the same point last year in the VBMs in those same places. So they really are cranking it, and they're ahead of Republicans in those counties, in the urban counties. So I think there's some evidence that they are hitting their marks. What they need to do is continue to hit their marks.
Now, Phil Murphy, Micah, stay with me on this one. Phil Murphy won by 3 points, which means he won, and he got that second term as governor. He didn't get the big numbers out of the suburbs that he thought he would. We could, right. People like me blame it on a certain Kansas state representative who believed the polls and went to brunch on the Sunday before the election. But the reality is those numbers weren't there. And even as they built that infrastructure, even as though they had the grassroots support, they didn't turn those numbers out. Murphy won on the backs of highly educated suburban voters. He won, almost, and of course I'm Essex, so I look at everything in terms of North Jersey. I apologize to you, Micah, for that. But I look at that old, the train station towns that used to be where Republicans just killed it. Places like Ridgewood and Westfield and Summit, Milburn. That's where Murphy did really well. And is that Cheryl's task too? Does she need to sort of replicate that or even exceed that Murphy appeal in high income, highly informed suburban areas in the state?
Certainly in her congressional district, in her backyard in suburban Essex County, she's got to do all those things. She's a known quantity there. She's got to crank up the votes there to the extent that she can. I would have agreed with you up until maybe even this morning that was a big part of the strategy. I almost am persuaded now, after talking to some Democrats about the Get Out the Vote operation, they're going to let that happen. Obviously, they're going to let that come organically to them. It's not who they're focusing on and who they're trying to turn out. They are trying to turn out their base vote. They are trying to turn out those people who they think they have a good shot at getting. And I guess maybe they're afraid if they go into some of those areas that they're not all that they're not all ripe. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think there are definitely voters in those suburban towns that are known to them at this point to be supportive. The people who have participated in the protests certainly, are a good number and a big number across New Jersey. But I get the sense that for them and for their turnout, this is very much about their base vote.
And what about the Trump factor in terms of, we're looking at Chitterelli's reliance on the Trump factor differently. We're looking at him hoping that Donald Trump can convince low propensity state election voters to come out and vote for him because Trump's asking them to. But what is the compare for me, the how Democrats are viewing Donald Trump today versus the way they viewed him in 2017?
I think they know that he is not blunt force that you can just use everywhere. You can't use it generically. I think that that's something earlier in the campaign. The Trump attacks had the feel of, generic. They weren't specific to New Jersey. That was a criticism of Mikey Sherrill. You asked in the very first question in the debate about that. I think that the Trump attacks have gotten sharper. They've gotten specific to New Jersey. They've gotten to talk about the Gateway Tunnel project. They've gotten to specific harms to New Jersey. What I've also heard a lot of Democrats is resonating is the destruction of the White House, that we needed a physical symbol of what was going on in order for Democrats to be able to latch on to that and see that as if they didn't see any of the problems before. But that this is what they're citing when Democrats are going to their door and saying this is the problem with this guy. So I think the attacks have had to get sharper. They've had to get more precision. But I also think that for Ciattarelli, this has been a real problem for him. And this is why his reaction when he's asked about Trump gets so stilted now, and he'll only say the same thing. And it really is uncomfortable for him to try and thread the needle, because you've heard, I would say we've all heard in the last week to 10 days, a real recognition on the part of the Ciattarelli campaign that there aren't enough votes just among Republicans, that they've got to win unaffiliated voters, which they've always known, of course, and they've got to win crossover Democrats. The real challenge there is, how do you win crossover Democrats and how do you win unaffiliated voters when you're throwing both arms around an unpopular White House, when you've graded the White House with an A, when you've said you agree with them all the big issues. So he really has a problem here, I think, in terms of how to handle this guy. They've made the calculation that they've got to be with him. They get nothing out of differing with him, out of offering distance with him. But they need some of those voters who may not like Trump.
So one of the things that, go ahead, Joey, and then I'll ask.
Well, I remember people being a little bit baffled at the Ciattarelli strategy in 2021, which was not quite a wholehearted embrace of Trump. Ciattarelli wasn't sort of on the full MAGA train yet, and also Trump was not on the full Ciattarelli train yet. There still was some sort of bad blood there. But the Ciattarelli campaign, I remember it made repeated moves that tilted very strongly in sort of a more Trumpian and more conservative direction policy-wise, and people were kind of like, "What are you doing?" Like some stuff about LGBT education in schools and immigrants arriving with COVID and then infecting the state with COVID, and just some lines like that people were sort of thinking like, okay, great. This was after Ciattarelli had already won the nomination, so it wasn't a ploy to kind of win conservative votes there. It was already in the general election. People were saying, "What are you doing?" And then it turns out that his campaign had this sort of clever idea this whole time, which came close to working, which is that, you keep the conservative base together, you get a ridiculous number of votes out of the conservative areas of the state, like Ocean and Monmouth County. And then you trust that, with a Democrat who is becoming more and more unpopular by the day in the White House, and with Democrats in control of Washington and of state government, all of the sort of squishier moderate voters who might not love to pull the lever for Donald Trump would look at someone who is promising lower taxes and better and a different school funding formula and say, yeah, sure. I'm not nervous about this guy. I'm not scared about what's happening, with his ties to Republicans in Washington. It feels like that's a whole other world away. Trump isn't president. It's fine to vote for this guy. Mm. And I think that you've seen a relatively similar strategy this year, but I wonder if it will run into a little bit more headwinds, because you've now got a Republican in the White House, and those voters no longer are able to have the same mentality of, oh, well, it'll be fine. Like, I'm a Democrat in some elections, but because my property tax bill is too high, I'm definitely going to vote for a Republican here. That voter has to also think about, well, but I really don't like the way Trump is approaching deportations, the White House demolition, whatever else. He is currently in power. He will be in power for the next 3 years. Republicans control Washington. Do I want someone who says he gives him an A in the governor's office? That's just a really different calculation depending on who's in the White House.
Look, one of the things that struck me about all three polls today, as we move
There's more than three.
Well, the three that I really paid close attention to, and until somebody tells me who SoCal is, I don't know that I.
Well, Fox News got Charlotte by 7. I would count 4.
Yeah. So one of the things that I saw in those 4 polls is that this is the most expensive campaign in New Jersey history, and that includes John Corzine and Doug Forrester spending down, their personal wealth to go after each other 20 years ago.
Calculations include the primaries?
Yeah, well, that
it does.
It does. Yeah. This general is more expensive. I haven't adjusted for inflation or anything, but the primary messaging all helps solidify how people feel about them in the general too. And neither of these primaries were all that close. So this is just it's a lot of money that's been spent. And the point I'm going to is they haven't really killed each other off when you look at favorables. That the favorable to unfavorable ratios, the difference between Sherrill and Chitterelli aren't that different. It's not like, and not for lack of trying, but it's not like any one candidate has bludgeoned the other to death. They seem to have beaten each other up sort of on equal terms, and a lot of these issues haven't stuck. A lot of the negatives, you just don't see those high numbers. So, so what's Steve? I mean, Zach, I'll start with you. How do you read the fact that with all the money and all the press releases and negative ads and the fact that the two have certainly proceeded as though they don't particularly care for each other, although they are civil to each other when they have debated. But yeah, I think they were. You know what, Joey, from a Jersey standard, I think that they were fairly civil.
Only one likely lawsuit is rising.
Yeah, it could have been a lot worse. And yeah, you're right about that. And you've had charges made that have been that are not necessarily fair, not necessarily accurate. And I've talked about that before. But the reality is you don't have anybody with approval ratings that are like down in Chris Christie's zone or anything. So what does that tell you? What should I read, if anything, out of that?
I don't think you should read too much out of it, other than I think a huge proportion of attacks this year are based on partisan level rather than leveled against character or et cetera. Like it's not. It's generally not Jack Chitterelli is evil. It's that Jack Chitterelli is a friend of Trump, and that's why you should hate him. And so when 40% of the population likes Trump, that's not going to drag his favorables down among them. Similarly with Micah Sherrill and Phil Murphy, when a good proportion of the state likes Phil Murphy, attacks on her ties to Phil Murphy aren't going to drag down her favorabilities. When they've parted that path to launch separate attacks, whether it's one's ties to one's reported ties to the opioid industry, or one's discipline at the Naval Academy. Neither of in the case of the Chitterelli attack, it wasn't new. People remember it, or maybe they not remember it, but it happened in 2021, and there's nothing at least nothing in polls or anything that shows that it is a sort of just like a nail in the coffin type of attack. And neither is the attack on Sherrill. Democrats believe her story, that her claims that she just didn't rat a classmate out at the Naval Academy. And when your side believes you, that's just 40% of people who are automatically going to like you no matter what. And so that just gives them a really easy floor to maintain, but also a short ceiling. I don't think you will see, if either of them are elected, either of them really go much higher than 50 55% in approvals.
Yeah,
David, I think. Oh, go ahead, Joey. Go ahead.
Well, I'll just make this point quickly, which is that, the parties and party leaders kind of liked both of these candidates to begin with, long before they even won their primaries, because they were specifically kind of hard to attack. I mean, Chitterelli has already kind of been through the ringer. He's a pretty stand-up guy. He's had, some issues over the years that Democrats have been able to bring up and attack ads and whatever. But, he's come through, and he's come through looking fine. So Republicans already kind of knew they had a known quantity in him. And Mikey Sherrill has been sort of specifically heralded by both Democrats and Republicans for years as being someone who they found almost impossible to attack. I think Chitterelli has been the first person in her entire political history to actually find a couple of avenues that are sort of stinging. But even then, I mean, the whole sort of, one of the big parts of her appeal is that she has this sort of bio and this life story and this demeanor that just do not lend themselves to attack easily at all. And so I think that if you this is not targeted at any of their primary opponents necessarily, because I think that their primary opponents each had their own advantages that the nominees do not. But, you could imagine a scenario where one party or the other nominated someone who had a lot more obvious vulnerabilities or a lot more skeletons in the closet. And maybe their opponent would have found something that just hit so hard that they're, limping into the general election with horrible favorables and just hoping that something pulls them across the finish line. But these are two people who were already sort of, they were known to be able to withstand that kind of scrutiny, and they basically have.
I think we can look at this new, growing, whatever you want to call it, low information environment that both allows this to happen because people don't know a whole lot else about what's going on in our state politics and our state government right now, because they're not reading newspapers anymore. They're not following the 75 state house reporters who used to be covering our state politics and our state government on a daily basis. And those who are following the Globe are certainly getting their daily fill of our state politics. But unfortunately, that's not every person in the state, right? And so I think that the reason why we've gotten a race the ads have been entirely defined by the half-truths, by the twisting of the words on both sides, is because people don't know a lot more about them than what they're getting from the ads. And I also think that helps to explain why neither side has been able to finish each other off with these ads, is because not everybody is seeing them anymore. Not only do we have a low information environment, we also have a very dispersed media environment and media ecosystem in which you can't just put money on network TV anymore and expect that that's going to carry the day. You've got to do more of your budget, and we certainly saw this in the debate, on streaming, because more people are streaming than they are watching on cable or on broadcast at this point. That's not so easy to figure out how to talk to voters when you've got to reach their specific medium. And I think we're in a situation where a lot of people are seeing the ads, but not everybody is seeing the ads.
And let me, because I wanted to try and keep the governor's part of this to under around an hour, which we are now. So we're, but I had a couple things that I don't want to forget to bring up. So one of them is that every poll that we see, we're talking about taxes. Taxes are always the number one issue in New Jersey. And I said earlier, this is my 14th gubernatorial race. The previous 13, 26 candidates said they were going to lower taxes, and none of them ever did. So, I mean, Mike, I'll ask you this since you've been around second longest. Voters say they're concerned about taxes, and I believe that. That's entirely credible.
Sure.
But do you think voters have an expectation that anybody's really going to cut their taxes?
No, and especially not the tax that they're upset about, which is the property tax. They don't think that they're electing a governor, with either governor, who is going to drive down their property taxes. I don't even know that people make the connection to state aid, which is the obvious way that governors can have an impact on property taxes. So I don't think there's an expectation, though, that you're going to change, what is essentially a locally driven tax proposition. But unless we were to fundamentally change how we finance schools, which neither side is campaigning on at this point or has talked about, I don't think they're looking for that. I mean, of course, we always want to be told, yeah, we're going to lower your taxes, but I don't think anybody has an expectation of that. I think what we probably are looking for is some understanding, awareness, empathy. Are you going to have your eye on this? Are you going to look for opportunities, or is it something that you are out of touch about? Is it something you don't understand?
Micah, would you say that tax cuts are on the table?
I would say that we're going to get a 10% tax increase.
Yeah.
I look forward to those attack ads against
Yeah. And then the other question, Joey, I'll start with you on this because this is now your second gubernatorial race. I've never seen one before where the incumbent governor is less relevant. And I don't say that in a derogatory or disrespectful way, but I've never seen one where the sitting governor is less relevant in the discussions than Phil Murphy is this year. And we saw it in 2017. It wasn't just Trump. It was Christie. And you saw Corzine lose, and you had the Florio years, and even when a governor was popular going out like Tom Kean, you had people bending over backwards to say, I want to be Tom Kean's third term. What is it, Joey? What do we read into the fact that we're not really hearing a whole lot about Phil Murphy in this campaign?
I think part of that stems from Murphy himself. I feel like Murphy's got maybe a little bit of senioritis here. He got a lot of what his original campaign promised, most of what his original campaign promised, done sort of in his first term or early in his second. Some of the things that are sort of more continuing projects, like fully funding the pensions, it's not super sexy. You can just sort of do it every year and say, look, we fully fund the pensions again. Look, we got a credit rating upgrade again. And people will go, okay, and then move on. You can make an argument about how that's good governance, but it's not something that people are going to be sort of, jumping up and down for joy over. You saw Phil Murphy kind of make a couple of national political attempts. He was sort of looking at president or vice president. Tammy Murphy was trying to get into the Senate. That all kind of fell through a little bit. So I think part of it is stemming from there. You just don't see a ton coming from the governor's office in general. And then from the perspective of the candidates, Jack Ciattarelli brings up Phil Murphy plenty as sort of a foil for this is what the state looks like under Phil Murphy. And Matt Platkin, I think Matt Platkin is maybe mentioned in as many breaths as Phil Murphy is on the Ciattarelli campaign. Here's what I would do differently. That's sort of an easy way for any voter who feels any sort of general sense of malaise about the direction of the state, which is most voters. That's an easy sort of shorthand to be like, I want to move on. But also Phil Murphy is not unpopular enough to make that a slam dunk where you can just say, when Phil Murphy ran in 2017, he could say, like, I'm going to kick Chris Christie to the ground and I'm going to wail on him and I'm going to do, like, he could say whatever he wanted about Chris Christie and people would lap it up because Christie was just that unpopular at that point. He weren't really risking any votes by doing that. No. But for Murphy is sort of in this in between where Ciattarelli maybe doesn't have the full-on incentive to go, absolutely ham on him. And Cheryl, who wants to sort of have a message of change, but also doesn't want to push away the Democrats who loyally voted for Phil Murphy twice, doesn't really have a ton of incentive to bring up his administration either. When she's directly asked about it, she can say the things that she would want to continue. She can say the things that she'd want to do differently. At the debate, she gave his administration a B, so sort of a passing grade, but not thrilled with him. I feel like that is maybe how a lot of Democrats would judge his administration overall. And I think that they're letting the chips fall on that. They see more strength in their own campaigns and their own messages than they do in sort of building it around in opposition to or off of the existing administration.
At the same time, too, though, I think I would imagine, I haven't done the analysis or whatever, but Jack Ciattarelli does bring up Trenton Democrats a lot, the right. Phrase Trenton Democrats. Now, I bet if you polled the nebulous Trenton Democrats phrase, it would do a good bit worse maybe than Phil Murphy. And so I think it's just a little bit of strategy there, too.
Right. And it's and it's the funny thing where you could poll, say voters in a swing Democratic held legislative district on what they think about Trenton Democrats, and they'd probably give them terrible marks. and then you'd poll them about, their actual local state Democratic state legislators, and those voters who had heard of them would probably give them relatively positive marks. That's just sort of a general instinct among voters in polls is the aggregate, the things that are just sort of making your taxes too high and making your schools not get enough money. That's all bad. But
Congress,
like the people who are physically doing that, but who you voted for or who you like for X reason, or they showed up to that potluck or they got you that money that one time, they're fine. It's just the others that are, something's wrong there.
Congress has a 15% approval rating and never fails to get reelected.
Right. And individual members of Congress are usually pretty well liked.
Micah, you teach this, right? You teach that everybody hates Congress, but they love their congressman.
Their own congressman, exactly. But conversely, we're talking about a governor who probably hasn't been a lightning rod for supporters, and he hasn't been a lightning rod for detractors. He's just kind of been there, right? And people have, whatever general feelings they're going to have about him. But the campaigns clearly have both determined that he's not a good foil, and he's not somebody good, like you described, Tom. People were looking to run. Give me a third Tom Kean term. That certainly has not been the case for Sherrill or for Chitterelli. They haven't found a good guy to rally around for positive or for negative.
Well, let me ask
they're strong enough on their own that they can reasonably say, I will be the first term of me, and that's not the worst message to have.
Yeah.
She hasn't really even had to respond to that though, right? She hasn't,
Mm-hmm. So, and I'll close with this, and we'll move on to legislative races. But one of the things I saw in the Suffolk poll that I thought was interesting is, it didn't surprise me as I did my deep dive into something that a couple hours earlier I had said I wasn't going to do anymore. It didn't.
And you told us not to do. You told everybody this morning.
You're the only one bringing the polls up.
And I did it. But
who are these people who are keep on bringing up polls? I disapprove of them. I approve of David Wildstein, but I disapprove of people who keep on bringing up polls.
There were certain things that I found interesting. Certain little nuggets in there, like the number of people that are voting for Mikey Sherrill because of Donald Trump. That didn't surprise me. But I saw that a third of Chitterelli's supporters say they're supporting him because they don't like the Democratic leaders. And I'm not really sure what that means. I don't think that they're talking about Nick Scutari and Craig Coughlin. No. Right? I think they're when they say they don't like the Democratic leaders, I think that's sort of a generic, we're not voting for Chitterelli because we don't like the Democrats.
Maybe it means that Chitterelli should have nationalized the race more.
Yeah. And I don't have it in front of me. And if I
Mikey Sherrill, Hakeem Jeffries, Chuck Schumer agenda.
Exactly. But I think Spanberger is being lumped together with Nancy Pelosi right now in an ad.
Yeah, she is.
Closing ad. Yeah.
They're lumping together Mikey Sherrill with Zoran Mondani.
And
is not a national Democratic leader.
Yeah.
But they didn't say national Democratic leaders. They just said Democratic leaders. I thought that was interesting. But anyway, we've done an hour and 12 minutes of our 1 hour discussion on the governor's race. And I'm sure we'll come back to the governor's race as we talk about individual legislative districts. But let's start in District 3. And that is.
Can we quickly talk just sort of on a broad view of what the race
is?
We
can talk about anything you'd like to, because I'm in it for the duration. I'll go as long as you do.
Well, I just think setting the table at least a tiny bit before being like, and here's how we think that Hopewell Township in Cumberland County is going to vote. Democrats have a 52 to 28 majority in the assembly. Democrats went into 2021 thinking that they would probably break even on their pretty big majorities or even gain a little bit. And then they ended up unexpectedly losing quite a lot of ground. They lost some seats in LD3 and 11 in particular. They really didn't even think were close to being on the playing field. And that made them very, very nervous heading into 2023. The demeanor of the legislature completely changed. It became sort of a more politically moderate and especially more politically cautious body. You could just sort of feel that. That was right when I was starting working here. I sort of saw the legislature in right before that kind of shift happened, and then you kind of you saw the difference in how especially the Democrats in sort of swingy districts were thinking about things. But then 2023 went totally fine for them. They pretty much made back all of the ground that they lost in 2021. They got a couple of upsets of their own. And so now they're back at sort of near their historic highs in both, well, not all-time history, but sort of recent history highs of membership in both the Assembly and the Senate. And you definitely, if you're in a swing district in New Jersey, you probably know plenty about your local race for legislature, but and only Assembly in every district but one. There's one district where there's a Senate special election, but otherwise Assembly is the highest legislator you're voting for this year.
And that Senate race is not competitive.
And that Senate race is not, it's not much of a thing. But sort of in broad strokes, the race for the legislature is something that is not broken through in the same way that the race for the governorship has. I mean, you have seen like every national publication under the sun rediscover the existence of New Jersey and write about, with vague headlines being like, is this Democrat about to lose the New Jersey governor's race to this Republican? Or even better, is this Democrat about to lose the governor's race in this state to this Republican? Great. You haven't seen any of that kind of attention on the legislature, on the Assembly. And I think part of that is because neither party is really, really treating it like this is going to be super competitive, at least in terms of overall control. You could see a situation where neither party really makes much ground. You could see a situation where Cheryl wins by a lot and that drags some Democrats across and Democrats end up with a really, really big majority. And you could see a situation like 2021 where Chitterelli comes close to winning or even wins, and that pulls some Republicans across in sort of lean D districts. But even in that latter scenario, you would have to make up a ton of ground to actually get to a Republican majority. I mean, you'd have to flip 13 seats, most of them held by powerful Democratic incumbents. That's in most universes that is not going to realistically happen.
Yeah. So for a group of people,
to sort of set that table in terms of we're talking about control of a lot of individual districts here. We're probably not talking about control of the legislature. This is more about what kind of assembly is the next, and the next governor is going to have to work with a Democratic Senate no matter what. And the Senate is more important because they deal with nominations. But what kind of assembly is the next governor going to be dealing with? Is Mikey Sherrill going to be dealing with a huge majority? Is she going to be dealing with a small majority? Is Chitterelli going to be dealing with a small Democratic majority? That's what these districts are going to be ultimately deciding.
Yeah. So as we set the table on this, for a group of people who have decided at the beginning, an hour and 16 minutes ago, that we weren't going to do any predictions, is there anybody who disagrees with my belief that Craig Coughlin is going to be the speaker in January?
Do not disagree. I agree.
It would take the most perfect of perfect storms to have any other outcome. I mean, Republicans would have to run the table in every single district where they even have a shot.
Yeah.
And then my only question, and I don't know the inside baseball maybe as much as you more experienced reporters do, but if it gets tighter and we see the handful of sort of independent Democrats show up in the assembly, maybe there's a chance where even if Democrats hold 50 or not like 43, 44 seats, they do a power play of some sort and try to shift up leadership or something. But that doesn't involve Republican control still. That's just
So that is another thing that I forgot to mention in my sort of table setting, which is that, regardless of what happens in the general election, the primary elections have already kind of shifted the ground under the people's feet. You do have these 4 sort of more independent, not county party aligned legislators. They're almost certainly all going to be legislators because they're in safety districts: Katie Brennan, Ravi Bala, Ed Rodriguez, and Kenyatta Stewart. You've got a couple of others who might win in swing districts who also sort of won their primaries to that party support. And then you have a lot of incumbents who just came shockingly close to losing in their primaries. I mean, just off the top of my head, Balveer Singh, Mike Venezia, Joe Danielson and Kevin Egan, Jerry Walker and William Sampson. All of them are going to be coming into the legislature sort of looking over their shoulders because they know that their districts are no longer locked down for them, especially with the county line gone. And that, whereas before they could vote the way that they felt like they needed to, or the way that leadership told them to, and the things would ultimately be fine for them, they can't really have that calculation anymore. So that is definitely going to be a dynamic that's going to affect the next legislature in ways that we don't know yet, both these independent-minded legislators and the legislators who are just scared.
And the arrival of those at least 4 independent legislators means that if Republicans can flip something like 8 seats and make those members a much more important part of the assembly, it'll be a very different type of politicking that Craig Coughlin or whoever is in charge for the Democrats will have to partake in.
And look, there's 2 ways of looking at Coughlin on election night. They both start with, we have good news and bad news. The good news is you're going to be speaker again. But one scenario is the bad news is Republicans picked up enough seats that with these independent Democrats leading this place is going to be a little harder. The other bad news for Craig Coughlin is, holy crap, we just picked up a bunch of seats we didn't expect. And is Craig Coughlin's caucus too big to succeed?
And once you start having people in the sort of reach districts winning, those people are people who they might be. I mean, they're not anybody, but they might be anybody in the sense that they might not have actually been the local county party's favorite person. They might not really know Craig Coughlin at all. They might not be aligned with his leadership at all.
And they don't have to worry about whether they get the line or not in 2027. Right. And one of the things that I've seen, I can't even count the number of times in I got 52 years that I've watched this is unknowns winning elections. It didn't just start with Ed Durr. This is a time-honored tradition that when you in legislative races, you get people that you didn't see coming, and suddenly they're serving, and you get these surprises. Chitterelli, it's one of the things he actually jokes about is he had coattails in 2021. His own coattails weren't enough for him to win. For him, but places like he did pickups in District 2 and 3 and 11. A lot of these were Chitterelli coattails. They weren't voting for Beth Sawyer. They were voting Republican. And I think that's a big part of it. So now that we've set the table, let's start in District 3, which
Sawyer's old district.
Yeah, and this is the Ed Durr district, and this was the Steve Sweeney district, and the
Ray Zane district.
The Ray Zane district, and Ray Zane was the because for those of you that don't know the whole thing, although you will when Zach and Joey's voter guide comes out, is you'll see a little of the history here, but Ray Zane was a conservative Democrat. He was never 28 years in the Senate. He was never a guy that leadership could count on. And I'll tell you, I met him when I was 12 years old, and I will only say this: of the 40 senators that I met when I was 12 years old, only 2 of them, I went home thinking, what jerks.
He's a crusty guy. He was a crusty guy, yeah.
And Ray Zane was one of them. Yeah. Sweeney beat him, but this district is conservative, and you're looking at some of these numbers of how much Chitterelli won this by. Chitterelli overperformed Trump in this district, right? I mean, it's I have to turn around and get my glasses so I can see these numbers on there, but I think Chitterelli did better.
Chitterelli was +16. Trump was about +7.
Yeah, so
all across South Jersey, basically, regardless of the type of district, the type of town, Chitterelli just kind of romped in 2021 in a way that Trump, even though Trump was doing sort of historically well in South Jersey, at least for recent history, it still couldn't match anything like what Chitterelli was getting.
The reason why that happened, by the way, because you have presidential turnout, which brought out more Democrats. And don't forget, this is the district with Bridgeton in it. So you were going to get a lot of presidential only voters who were going to come out and vote for Harris that weren't going to even bother with the legislative elections.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Micah, let me start with you, since the 3rd district or the Vineland suburbs. Mm-hmm. You look at this map, and if for a moment you forget that George Norcross is running this campaign, and you forget the fact that that Heather Simmons and Dave Bailey are decent enough candidates. They don't have John Bersicelli on the ticket with them this time, and that's clearly to their detriment.
Which is something that they have. Which is something we're going to talk about when we get to District 11 too, and running without Vin Gopal.
Right.
And they're running without Ed Durr on the ballot. I think that is just as much an impediment to Democrats as not having Ed Durr as an easy foil.
Yeah, and we'll get to that, even in 21 with Bramnick. But the reality is, if you look at the map and you don't know about the money and you don't know about the Norcross element here, and you think, I'm not having anybody on the Democratic side argue with me of no, you're wrong. This is going to be Mikey territory. On this one, they're sort of conceding. So when you look at this map, let me start from sort of the opposite way. How do Democrats how do they win this? I mean, or should they win it? If not,
they're giving it their best shot. They have been everywhere in the district for the last 2 years. They have not stopped for a moment. You see them everywhere. They get around. They're constantly, much more than your average assembly member. They are out there in the district. They are not conceding. They are working it as hard as they can. But you do look at this map and you look at these numbers and you look at the off year and you say, how is it ever going to happen for them? If this is clearly going to be the first district that's going to fall. If districts start to fall, if the night is not great, this is the district before any others that you're going to look at first and you're going to say this is where Republicans are likely going to make up ground here.
I mean, my brief counterpoint to that, I don't disagree with the latter part of that take at all, or any of that take, really. I mean, I definitely think that, if we see any district flip, well, not including 8, because 8 is a weird case where, it's more likely than not that one district flips in one direction. We just don't really know which direction yet. But I think that this would be indeed the first district to fall. But in terms of sort of how do you overcome the Chitterelli numbers, Democrats came not that far away from overcoming the Chitterelli numbers in 2021. I'm looking at not even Steve Sweeney, who sort of is an entity unto himself, but even down on the assembly level, John Bersicelli and then Adam Taliaferro, who's the other assemblyman at the time, they lost by a little bit more than a combined margin of like 52 to 48 in 2021. And the district lines were a little bit different at the time. They were slightly less conservative. So this was something like Chitterelli plus 15 district. That's like an 11-point overperformance. I'm fudging the numbers a little bit, but that's basically what it was, 10 or 11-point overperformance. So I don't know whether that's replicable again, but if you were to have Mikey Sherrill losing this district by around the margin that Kamala Harris lost it, by 7, 8, 9 points instead of by 16, then that suddenly starts to feel like, given recent history, a winnable thing, right? We actually have recent evidence that the voters in this district are willing to ticket split quite a bit. They just weren't willing to ticket split in 2021 enough to save the Democrats. So I wouldn't necessarily say that Chitterelli's likely victory in this district is completely sort of lights out for the Democrats.
Now, and by the way, I premised it by saying pretend that George Norcross isn't there, but he is there. And they do run good campaigns in South Jersey, and they'd held this seat for since 2001, so 22 of 24 years. Can you argue now? When you think about those realities, is it the flip side? Is it that Simmons and Bailey are maybe the favorites? Again, and they're running against the sitting county commissioner from Gloucester County. South Jersey Democrats are concerned about this district. I mean, is this? Well, that's one of the ones we'll know it on Tuesday night, and we should just stop trying to guess it.
Well, that's the good news is that they're worried about it because they're working it very hard. I mean, this is one, and we'll talk about this same dynamic when we talk about the 4th district. But as an old campaign operative, you kind of admire the fact that in every day of early voting, the Democrats and the Gloucester Republicans are slugging it out. They are dragging out every vote that they can, and they're almost battling to a draw every single day. The Republicans have not been able to come out on top any of the days so far in the early in-person voting, but they are both leaving it all on the field, and they are within inches of each other every day. So neither one of them is taking this for granted. They're scrapping for every vote, and ultimately the good news for those four legislators, the Democrats, is that what may wind up being material there are the 10,000 vote lead that Democrats have in banked votes, mail-in votes in Gloucester County. So that may matter a lot.
Yeah. That's clearly their strategy. Is exactly that, and that's really been what South Jersey, they were the first in the state to really latch on to this early vote part, and they've built an infrastructure that's paid off. They try to move that I thought they believed they could sneak by and nobody would notice, and somebody did, which is Gloucester County, inexplicably decided, what, we're going to do office block ballots for the general election. That was, not, it was a smart move. It was a good, it was a valiant try of, let's see if we could cut into some coattails somewhere along the way. They actually got a Superior Court judge and a decent Superior Court judge to let them get away with it. I don't know that they were banking on it going all the way to the appellate, and the appellate division, working in record time. And by the way, they've gotten, the appellate division's gotten a lot better on that, on these election matters. But I look at this, and you're right, Micah. They're leaving, they're leaving nothing on the table for this. They're fighting for every vote.
And those mail-in ballots went out as office block, right?
They did.
It was successful, at least for like a portion of the electorate.
Yeah. It's I haven't fully grasped yet. What the there's been no science on the difference between people voting sitting down versus standing up. And someday we're going to figure that out, because now you have such a large number of voters who are voted while they're sitting down, and one day we'll figure that out. Here's one question, and then we'll move on to another district. But I was surprised in the primary that in the 3rd district, Steve Sweeney got 40% of the vote. Now that enabled him to win his old district, but it meant that 6 out of 10 Democrats in his old district didn't vote for him for governor. So it was about 16,000 Democrats didn't vote for Sweeney for governor. I'm sorry, I'm saying this wrong. I'm getting this completely wrong. 6 out of 10 didn't vote for Sweeney, but 16,000 Democrats in the 3rd district voted for either Fulop or Spiller or Baraka. And that was about a third of the vote. Are those voters now motivated to come out, given the fact that they're dealing with a more of a centrist Democrat at the top of the ticket? Because you got to figure, if you live in that region of the state and you're voting for Fulop or Spiller or Baraka, it shows that there is a progressive base there.
To some extent, sure. I do think, I think Baraka won a lot of progressive votes. I also think he won votes from a lot of Black New Jerseyans who maybe aren't progressive, but are also just conservative Democrats, as we know there are a lot of. And I think, I don't think voters, especially in primaries like this one, where, Spiller outspent a lot of the other candidates in South Jersey, I don't think it's solely ideologically based. But I do think a 40% for Sweeney in this district maybe just shows, that the machine isn't quite as dominant as they were hoping or as it used to be.
My take on this in general, and this isn't specific to LD3, is, we sort of in our media sphere and people in the political sphere will hear from people like the example that I'll pull out, and it's a little bit of a ridiculous example, is Nick Sacco again, where, he supported Steve Phillip in the primary. He didn't get his pick. And so he throws up his hands in the air and says, well, I'm voting for Jack Ciattarelli instead.
Yeah.
And that type of voter, either one who, defects to the other party or one who says, well, my nominee didn't get the nomination, I'm not voting at all, sort of looms large in our minds. And I think is actually not that common. I think that if you are a committed enough Democrat to turn out in a Democratic primary and vote for a Democrat, any Democrat, you are probably enough of a Democrat to then turn out in the general election and vote for whichever one won the nomination. And the same goes for Republicans. I mean, the people who turn out in primaries are people who are reliably committed to that party. They have chosen to register with that party when they didn't need to, and they chose to turn out in an election and choose a candidate. And I think all but the absolute crankiest are then going to pretty reliably turn out again in November and vote for whoever got the nomination.
And I think that if it were more purely ideologically based, then we would have seen Spiller do better in North Jersey or Baraka do better in South Jersey. But they're proof that it's more than just ideology. It's also geography, base, money, spending that really plays into that.
We've heard a lot again this week, and I talked about this a little while ago about a secret defection of Democrats, or hidden Democratic crossover votes. What I find compelling about the argument against that is we just haven't seen the evidence of that. We haven't seen the polling that shows that in any significant numbers that's what's happening. In fact, every poll I have seen all season says that both candidates have consolidated their bases behind them,
Right, yeah.
at least as strongly on Cheryl's side as on Ciattarelli's side. So I just don't see a lot of evidence that either one of them. I mean, of course, the issue is always whether or not somebody from your own party is motivated to come out and vote. But I don't see a lot of evidence that they're voting for the other side.
Okay, so let's go to District 8, and we're going to jump around a little bit. So those of you who want to hear about some of the others in the South, we're going to come back. But
we're organizing it more by competitiveness than we are by geography.
So let's go to District 8. This is one of two split districts in the state. I remember, election night, we thought that the two Republican incumbents had held the seat, and then literally as we were doing our Thursday night post-debate live stream, the news was breaking that there were more votes, and Andrea Katz was now on her way to win. Sort of old.
Which, as I was noted, is the second time that a Republican has in Burlington County has led an election night, only for a Democrat with the initials AK to pull ahead in the days after the election day, due to late counted mail-in votes.
Yeah.
So, history rhymes.
Actually, I don't know. I think the now U.S. Senator was ahead on election night.
I think he was behind on election night and pulled ahead the next morning. I feel like I remember, this is before my time as a New Jersey political journalist. I just remember following this as like a hobbyist in college. I feel like I remember seeing the notification of Andy Kim now in the lead.
So I'll tell you why I think my recollection is correct. Is he was up a little bit, but not enough to call the race. We at the New Jersey Globe do these all-nighters on election night, and I remember calling poor Nikita Birikov, who was Joey's predecessor, at like 5 o'clock. We're all on fumes and saying Andy Kim is doing a press conference. I think he's going to claim victory. You got to get over there. So he was up, and there weren't a lot of numbers coming in that day. But the reality is, let's go back to District 8. 8 is split. This is one of those places where the campaign never stopped. It has been ongoing since early 2023. It is the exact two matchups. Brandon Umba, former assemblyman who who lost his seat really narrowly, is running again with his running mate Mike Teresi, and Anthony Angelosi, who wasn't far behind Katz on those totals.
Actually beat Umba.
He beat Umba, so it was, it's happened before. It's just not coming back to me. It doesn't happen often when you have the same four twice in a cycle. And this campaign has never stopped. And it's sort of old school. And I say this with respect, the way leadership has dug in on Andrea Katz, that she has continued to work, that they've given her a lot of opportunities, that Michael Mueller and Mickey Quinn have not taken their foot off the gas in that race. You've got, when you look at it from an advisory standpoint, Harris Trump in this district, there weren't a lot of legislative districts closer than this one, which is more a validation of it being a competitive swing district than anything else. You've got the advantage of the Norcross money, but you've got, what people are saying is, Chitterelli certainly the favorite in this legislative district. I mean, Zach, I'll start with you. I mean, you've covered these two incumbents, for over a year now. How do you read this district?
Oh gosh, that's a big question. I don't think there's any easy way to read it other than four candidates that are all well liked by their party and are all working very hard. And as we've even seen in early voting and mail-in voting data, are really turning out and juicing turnout and ballot submissions. This is going to be maybe the most energetic, maybe the most closely watched race of the year. And it's hard to make any sort of prediction without knowing what the statewide and especially South Jersey sort of environment looks like. But in 2023, and I sort of talk about this in the voter guide, in 2023, the sentiment was essentially that two people lost because two people had to lose. And I think if it turned out the same way this year, people wouldn't be surprised. Just, this is going to be a tight race, closely fought, and it's just, it doesn't get much tighter than this.
A lot of the union endorsements, a lot of advocacy groups have stuck with the incumbents. They've split their endorsements in this district. Micah, that's not always typical, is it?
No, it's not. No, and one of the unions that went the other way is the operating engineers. They've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars beating up Katz on school funding. Of course, that formula change a couple of years ago to deal with the parity that fast-growing districts needed, and it really, some districts that had shrinking enrollment really felt like they were on the short end of the stick of that, even though it certainly makes sense that you need funding based on the number of students you're educating now. However, Katz had been a very strong proponent of that even before she was in the assembly. Chesterfield, the town where she's from, happens to be one of those very fast-growing districts and needed a change, and she championed it and she got behind it. Evesham, Marlton, one of the biggest town in our district, was on the losing end of that. And so the operating engineers have spent about $600,000 really attacking her position on school funding. So that's been, I think, was a tough issue for her over the summer to deal with, and maybe has receded a little bit, but they've played a very active role there. David, you mentioned something early on about old school, and Zach mentioned how hard that they've worked. We saw this in the last cycle. We're seeing it again this cycle. Katz and Angelosi have knocked on thousands of doors. They're really putting in the shoe leather. This is one where that probably had a lot to do with their, with her win 2 years ago, and they are trying to replicate that this time. 10 or 12,000 doors the last time, another 8,000 doors this time, and every town in the district. And so they really have gotten around, and they're hoping that that's what will make a difference.
This is not an easy district to go door to door in either.
No.
Angelosi, when I talked to him a month plus ago, had already knocked on, I think the number was 8,000 doors or something in that realm. And
You're
similarly,
right,
Umba had knocked on several thousand doors in his own right.
Good. Yep.
Going back to the operating union, like Micah was mentioning, that's another interesting twist, because as you mentioned, a lot of the districts are backing both incumbents, one Republican, one Democrat. Operating engineers, though, have ties to Senator Tiver, the incumbent Republican in the district. And they want him to have two Republican allies in the legislature rather than potentially a Katz or an Angelosi, but especially a Katz who could potentially challenge Senator Tiver for Senate seat in 2 years. So there's another little background there. But.
Yeah, and I think it's more than a little background. I think to a certain extent, that's what this race might be about, is sort of that setting of the table of a Senate race. George Norcross understands the value of a large assembly delegation. He also knows how to price a Senate seat accordingly, and knows what that brings to the table also.
John Bertelli, though, can attest that you can lose re-election 1 year and then come back as an assemblyman, and then come back 2 years later as a Senate candidate and win. So, I don't think the Republicans are out of the woods from if they do.
With all due respect to Assemblywoman Katz, she's not John Bersacelli, and it being out of office for 2 years, would be more harmful. Or I don't want to say harmful, but makes her less compelling as a Senate candidate than Bersacelli. And one of the things I heard 2 years ago is people didn't realize Bersacelli was gone. I mean, they just didn't. They just, he's running for the Senate, and they just assumed he was still in the legislature. That's all part of, the changing media landscape. But this district, we're going to look at. We've been following it on early voting, advance voting, as Ryan Dubicki would call it. But this too. I mean, when we're checking numbers on election night. I think we're going to be going to 3 and 8. It's sort of the top of our list to see where this happens. Joey, is there? I mean, and I guess I don't want to. I want to rephrase what I was about to say, because I was going to ask you if there's a chance. You're going to say to me, yeah, there's always a chance. But given the amount of work, given the fact that they're running joint campaigns. Is there any presumption that the incumbents are at the top of their respective tickets, or could hypothetically Angelosi beat
an Angelosi and Umba ticket to the assembly next year?
Or Teresi, and as we looked at, we saw that in the primary. We know that the ghost of Christmas future is that running mates in the assembly are going to view each other more as rivals than they ever have. Is this something that is this a be careful what we wish for? Angela Katz has promoted Anthony Angelosi so frequently over the last 4 years that a good split vote out of Hamilton could sweep him in.
Well, David, anything's possible. Yeah. But I mean, I think that by far the most. Well, first of all, I should note that in the primary, Teresi and Katz both did way better than Umba and Angelosi. You can talk about various reasons why that is. Part of it is I think people were a little bit confused about the office block ballots and didn't really know that you could vote for 2 assembly candidates rather than just one. I wonder if we won't see that in the general election because it's still party line ballots. So I do think that there is some evidence that voters actually, are sort of more specifically aware of and fond of the incumbents rather than the challengers. But I also just think that, it it's always a little bit of a freak event when a district splits its ticket between the parties, especially when it's an assembly district that votes 1-1 versus, a district that votes one for senator and the other way for both assembly seats. I feel like the two ways that you get that are one, and this is becoming increasingly sort of remote just because state legislators don't have this kind of profile anymore. If there's two people from opposite parties that are just specifically amazing fits for the district and voters just can't stay away from either of them, then okay, maybe that happens. Or the other is if just the district hosts a really close election and that's just sort of the way the cookie crumbles. And so, you could theoretically see just a really, really close election this year again, and then you end up with a split result again. But statistically, the chances that it will be that close, like it was so insanely close in 2023, the chances that sort of lightning strikes twice enough that the ticket is that closely split seems relatively remote to me. I think that by far the more likely outcome here is that one party or the other, I won't really make any predictions about which, but one part or the other will win. And the one other thing that I want to say, I know, Micah, you want to jump in.
No.
The one other thing I'll say about LD3, LD8, and then I'll give you a sneak preview of the district we're going to next, which is LD21. These are kind of the three districts that I think both parties view as genuine toss-ups, or at least close to toss-ups. And one thing that I think maybe has gotten a little bit forgotten about all three is that the compromise map that Democrats and Republicans drew together in 2022 made all three of them redder. These were, that was sort of an incumbent protection map first and foremost. And so you saw Democratic districts get bluer and Republican districts get redder on the whole. There were a few exceptions, but mostly that was kind of the way it went. And these three districts, 3, 8, and 21, were all Republican controlled, fully Republican controlled after the 2021 elections. And so Democrats, sort of more concerned about protecting what they already had than gaining new things, were sort of willing to take the deal that would shift all of these districts, not a huge amount to the right. These were not the districts that were radically overhauled. There were a few that were like that, and these aren't among them. But they all, the LD21 went from a Murphy district to a Titterelli district. LD8 got, 2 points redder. LD3 got 1 or 2 points redder. So you do kind of have to wonder if now that these are sort of the swing districts, if on election night, Democrats are losing one or all of them by 1 point each, 2 points each, you kind of wonder if they are going to have a little bit of heartburn about what if we didn't take that deal map, or what if we tried to get a little bit of a better deal in this district. These couple of points, the fact that we traded out, what was it? Pine Valley. I forget which one is the defunct one. Pine Valley is the one that still exists, right? Or is it Pine Hill that's the one that still exists?
Pine Hill still exists.
Pine Hill is one. Okay.
Yeah.
The fact that we traded out Pine Hill for Bass River and Mullica, like that, that screwed over Andrea Katz. That's too bad. So that's another dynamic to the sort of long tail of redistricting.
And look, one of the things that I come to realize when we do these is every election we pick up new people that don't know all the history. So I'll briefly, sort of explain the backdrop of this. Legislative redistricting, because of COVID and because the census was delayed, legislative redistricting was 2 years late. And when they got together to do the map, Steve Sweeney had already lost that third district. And then, this was a time where the governor's office and Middlesex and, they weren't on the same page as South Jersey. They actually removed Steve Sweeney from his seat on legislative redistricting. So part of the deal is that Democrats didn't care a whole lot about these districts, because if they win, if they lose, then they're Republicans. If they win, they were Norcross. And either way, that wasn't that big a deal to Democratic leaders in Central and North Jersey. So, what you're seeing here is sort of the persistence of Norcross. The fact of, okay, and by the way, with whatever people, say, I think it's indisputable that he might be the most pragmatic man I've ever seen in New Jersey politics, which is, okay, we got screwed over in redistricting. So how do we win? What do we have to do now? Where do we move forward? He doesn't lament about the screwing. He says, okay, we've got to figure out new ways to compete in areas that are harder. And that's part of what keeps 3 and 8 in the game. And 8, we saw sort of slipping over the years. Remember, Burlington County Republicans held that county government with paint together with like painter's tape for a while. They held on to it for longer than they should have, and it was the same thing in District 8. And then what does Norcross do? Is he sees he goes, well, let's just get Dawn Addiego to switch parties and she'll run as our Democratic candidate. I mean, it's like a constant reinvention of themselves there, and I didn't know if I was going to be able to fit this in, but I guess I can. District 8, we saw it moving for a while, but the bottom line is until Andrea Katz won 2 years ago, Democrats had not won the 8th district since 1973, since the Watergate landslide, and even then they were only able to appeal one of the 2 seats. It was a guy named John Sweeney who got one term there. He got beat by a guy named Jim Saxton, who went on to spend 24 years in Congress. So this to me is sort of the fact that these numbers are changing, and even though they were even though this map was drawn early to be more Republican, I think it's becoming, I think more Democrats are being added to it than the Republicans can keep up with. I mean, this will, this is going to be a place that if they're going to hold it for, through the end of this map, which is coming on sooner rather than later, believe it or not, they're going to have to do it on the backs of incumbents and candidates who work hard and an organization that can deliver a lot of money.
My last point on the 8th is that this is really one in a handful, like 3-8-21, a handful of districts where both parties are really spending like they can win it. And they're spending like both parties are spending like they have an incumbent here, which is the truth because they both have an incumbent here. It's really just made it unique almost in the state in terms of how much both parties are focusing.
Yeah. Well, it is unique in the state. It's the only split we have in the state.
Well, and 30.
Well, 30, but that's weird.
Right. Thank you. Thank you. I'm sorry. I was thinking about.
I corrected that before Shlomo texted me. So we're
the old-fashioned way of getting there, right? Yeah.
I mean, and we saw the only split district going into give or take a Sam Thompson. Yeah. The only split district heading into 2023 was LD11, and that was similarly sort of both parties instinctively treated that as the single place to invest, like the biggest chunk of their resources because they each had incumbents to defend. Notably, that didn't mean that the race was actually close. Vin Gopal won in a ridiculous landslide, and Luann Peter Paul and Margie Donlin, we'll get to them in a little bit, won pretty handily over the Republican incumbents too. So just because the district splits its ticket once, and just because the parties are acting like it's extremely competitive, if Mikey Sherrill is winning this district by 6, or if Jack Trielli is winning it by 9 again, then there might just be nothing that the other party can do.
Like we said earlier about the governor's race, just because it's competitive doesn't mean it'll be close.
Right.
The other thing I'll say about 30 that's easy to overlook is that neither party is really going to try and take out that other seat, right? They're sort of content with the status that we've got there. But in any other split district that you might have, you'd see, each party scrambling to get the 2-seat advantage there.
Yeah. This is about, and I'll close with this. This is about the math of South Jersey in terms of their clout in a Democratic majority. And we'll get back to District 4 later if there's any kind of a tide. But you could be looking at South Jersey Democrats losing 3 seats, maybe more, but as we look at the most competitive 3 seats, that's a hit to the cloud of South Jersey in a caucus. And then, like I said earlier, the second part of it is the lead up to the 27th Senate race. That's one of the reasons these districts are so important is they don't want to go into a new majority, whether it's negotiating with Sherrill or Chitterelli or negotiating with Coughlin, where they're down, where their census is down to districts, 5, 6, and 7. That's not a big enough number of Democrats in a Democratic majority to stop anything or really make some waves. So and by the way, it should not be. I don't think even if they dropped 3 or 5 seats, I don't think Lou Greenwald's in any danger. I think he too has transcended regional politics and is popular in his caucus as majority leader. But just in terms of sheer clout, they can't afford to lose these seats. So let's.
And that's why,
yeah,
whatever outcome you would see here next week, it would immediately be challenged in 2027. Whoever lost, the Camden machine would try to come roaring back and win those seats back in 2 years.
Yeah. Let's go to 21. And this is this is part of what you'll see in the voters guide, written,
it's coming out tomorrow. We promise.
Yeah, expertly by Joey and Zach and practically not at all by me. So thank you guys for doing that. But these are the big 3, right? 3, 8, and 21. These are our top sort of most competitive districts. 21 is interesting in that it also has tilted. It was drawn for the Republicans twice in 2011. Again, well, I mean, even in 01. So the last 3 times they have carved out one district that was sort of Union County based, and started to seep into into Somerset. Now it's got even a little bit of Middlesex in it, but Democrats keep advancing even at a time where in a district where they really weren't supposed to. And to me, so you've got the 2 incumbents are running together, Nancy Munoz and Michelle Matsoukas, and Democrats are playing here. They're spending some money. Really interesting race in that they have 2 Democratic candidates that are running their own campaigns, and that is also unusual. And it's sort of hard to see where that's going, or whether that will help them win or prevent them from winning. But to me, and I'll start it out with this, Nancy Munoz has been in the assembly since 2009. Her late husband represented this district going back into the late 90s. And this is the first time Nancy Munoz has ever run for office without John Bramnick. And, I don't know if I say this, whether, I don't mean it as the double entendre, but without John Bramnick to the left of her on a ballot. It was either first on the ballot as the assembly candidate, or she was first on the assembly and he was in front of her on the as the Senate candidate. But this is the first time she's ever gone at it without John Bramnick, and I hear that from Democrats all the time. That Bramnick, and it is undeniable. He's had a connection with this district. Does better in Westfield, does better in Summit than Munoz does. He's not there to sort of guide that ship anymore. And Democrats view this district as a place where Mikey Sherrill can improve upon Phil Murphy's numbers as opposed to just defending them.
There are a lot of single issue voters in the 21st, and that issue is how funny are the lawyers. And with that, they've been dealt a good hand with John Bramnick for a long time. But John Bramnick not on the ticket this year.
The sad thing, by the way, Zach, the sad thing is Bramnick's pausing it and he's going back. He's saying, "Oh, that was funny. Let me write this one down." And
little John Bramnick invite me to open for him at a set. No.
Also, we do have a parallel John Bramnick on the ballot this year. Just his name is Curtis Sliwa and he's running in New York City.
Right. You mentioned, I think you offhandedly mentioned the Democrats. Andrew McCurdy, he's a former prosecutor, both in on the state level, federal level. And the other Democrat, Vinnie Kearney, I think he's on the ballot as Vincent. In ads, he goes as Vinnie. He's a Garwood councilman, sheriff's officer. They like you mentioned, they're running completely separate campaigns. McCurdy kind of just launched his own campaign without waiting. He said it's time to go. He raised a ton of money within the first month, and the Democrats were like, oh, I guess he's going to be one of the candidates. And then they attached Kearney on the ticket, and yeah, I see a lot of prognosticating that. If any district will flip from red to blue, at least both seats, obviously we have the 8th notwithstanding, it'll be this one. This is also one of the only districts for Democrats where they're really spending to flip. We're really seeing that the vast majority of energy for Democrats is for defending the 52 seats. Except for here, where they're spending a lot of money to try to flip it. So
and define who they is, because that's important.
What do you mean by they? Like spending?
They is the Senate president, who is also the Union County Democratic chairman, who is the one that has access to raise money.
And it's they're running separate campaigns. The Scutari money is going to Kearney and not necessarily McCurdy, but McCurdy has raised a ton of his own money by himself. But he's also received help from the state Democratic Party. So there's a real weird, and we'd go about it in more detail in the voter guide a little bit, but there's a little diverging path in terms of where they're getting their money and how they're doing theing their fundraising. It's interesting.
Yeah.
But GOTV is the great equalizer, because whatever you do in getting out the vote is not going to benefit one or the other. It's the final team project there. Even if they run completely separate campaigns.
Yeah, I mean, Bramnick in 23 won Westfield and Summit, and Westfield and Summit also went Democratic. Went Republican in local elections. These were issues where downtown redevelopment. These are NIMBY towns. The Democrats no longer wanted to be Democrat when they were, or Democratic when they were looking at maybe massive building and taller buildings and changing the downtown environment. Suddenly, they changed the way they were looking at it. In Westfield, there's probably in the midterm a lot of fatigue on Shelley Brindle, but the mayor and Summit and Westfield. Summit has a Republican mayor, but they sort of righted that ship, in the last election. The question is will Munoz and Matsakudis be able to take Westfield and Summit the way Bramnick did, or are you looking at McCurdy and Kearney going, building up some margins there? You've got some of these towns in Somerset that are not as Republican as they used to be. And one of the interesting things about McCurdy is he maybe more than any other candidate in the state, Zach, Joey, tell me if you agree with me or not, but McCurdy is the Andy Kim candidate in this general election. I mean, literally the Andy Kim candidate. McCurdy got involved in politics backing Andy Kim early in that Senate race.
I think that if McCurdy wins, it would not be. We'd have to see how he would actually sort of behave in the legislature. But I think it would not be crazy to sort of include him as even though he got party backing technically in the primary, it would not be crazy to sort of include him as a provisional member of this more kind of independent caucus of Democrats who aren't really beholden to anybody but themselves and who can kind of chart a more independent path, which would be funny if he wins, because most voters are at the end of the day straight ticket voters. It would be funny if he wins by basically the same margin as Vinnie Carney, and then these two completely polar opposite campaign strategies are both equally vindicated, and they just come to the legislature in completely different ways. I mean, you sort of mentioned this at the tail end of what you were saying before about how the parties expect Cheryl to probably do better here. I mean, I think that's right. I think if there's any district in the state that's likely to flip from Chitterelli 2021 to Cheryl 2025, it's this one. I mean, you can look at the 2025 or the 2021 result. It was only barely for Chitterelli. That was also a map-making choice where the old version of the district voted very narrowly for Murphy, and it was sort of specifically massaged even a little bit further to go red. I was just sort of, this district actually overlaps very slightly with Cheryl's own congressional district. So, you can see Chatham Township on the 2021 map in red there. It voted for Chitterelli by 2.5 percentage points in 2021. It voted for Cheryl by 16 percentage points in her congressional reelection in last year. I don't know if she can reach that height in a state level election with, a real opponent rather than the not really real opponent she had last year. But that's the kind of place where I think that if Jack Chitterelli is winning Chatham Township, then something is really going deeply wrong for Mikey Cheryl. So this is the kind of district where she should probably be making up quite a bit of ground. The question is, we're going to have some split ticket voters here. That is just sort of how this district has always worked. The Republican state legislators have always been able to do better than whatever the top of the ticket is doing. The question is, if Mikey Cheryl is winning this district by 8 or 9 points, like, is that really the kind of altitude? It's sort of the inverse LD3, right? Like, is that the kind of margin that even strong Republican incumbents, even a lot of ticket splitting can do anything about?
Joey, stick with that for a second. But so I hear from Democrats and Republicans that they're increasingly viewing Matsakoudas as the stronger of the two. Nancy Munoz has been there since 2009. It's a well-known name in this district. How has she gotten herself into this position where she's potentially beatable?
Well, first of all, I mean, I have no real stance one way or the other on the Matsakoudas versus Munoz thing, other than to say that in every election where they both run, except randomly their 2021 primary when Matsakoudas wasn't even yet an incumbent, but in every other instance, they've both been in the ballot. Munoz has done just a smidge better than Matsakoudas. So, if that were to flip around this year, it's entirely possible, but it would be sort of out of step with what their past electoral history has been. I think that these are two incumbents who have always been good at knowing their district and continue to be good at knowing their district. But at the end of the day, I've sort of long thought of this district as one that, unless you get up to some really creative map making, this will eventually go blue. It's just these towns are too firmly in the Democratic column in statewide elections at this point for that not to happen at one point. The question is just how long can Republicans kind of stave off that reality? And if you told me that this was the year that that kind of finally broke, I would say, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. You don't have the Senate on the ballot. You've got Mikey Cheryl at the top of the ticket. You've got really well-funded Democratic candidates who are, that wasn't really true in 2023, 2021, who are really running for it. If I were to look at sort of a broad arc of this district and you look at the Wikipedia page in 10 years and it was all red, and then starting in 2025, all blue, I'd be like, yeah, that actually kind of tracks.
Yeah. And we're, again, we always look at assembly as sort of the precursor to the Senate race. Most members of the assembly want to be senators. And, if they look at taking on Bramnick in 27, or if it's an open seat in 27, I would imagine a Democratic Senate primary there as well if these two guys win. But I think, again, I don't want to sound like I think they're going to win. I'm not sure. I have no idea other than the fact that they're running aggressive campaigns. I think we all seem to be in the same place, unless I'm getting it wrong, that we're sort of like a slight edge to Mikey Cheryl. in 21
in the district. Yeah,
in
yeah,
this
I think
district?
so.
So you're talking about, you're talking about a lot of money being spent on the Democratic side. And by the way, a lot of money spent on the Democratic side in 19 too, and in 2019, and it didn't work. But the reality is, you might have you have those headwinds of the top of the ticket. You have the money, and I don't know. There's any real negatives they're sticking here. This may just be it's either going to go blue or it's going to go red.
That is a thing that we could say about many districts.
Yeah. I know. Sometimes it sounds so simplistically, but I also wouldn't be surprised to see a split district here. But I don't know why I say it.
If there's any district that would be a split one, this one maybe makes the most sense, or maybe the second most sense after 8, just because, one would, at least in a vacuum, think that a split result is more likely if one of the sides are running a split campaign where the two candidates are doing completely different things independently of one another. Yeah. So if one of those strategies ends up paying a lot more dividends than the other, then maybe that would indeed be the recipe for a split result.
And I should probably, just because I don't want to give the wrong impression on this, the Jersey's got a long history of toxicity between running mates who are forced to become sort of partners in a race when they didn't choose each other. It was some matchmaker, county chairman who put them together, and now they're in each other's lives in a fairly significant way, and they never really agreed to it. They never
arranged marriages are hard.
Yeah, they are, but
they're cutting each other for votes and who can outdo who.
This case, my impression, unless Zach, unless you tell me I'm reading it wrong, my impression is it's not like you've got McCurdy and Kearney and they hate each other and they want to kill each other. They're just running separate races, and they're not mortal enemies. And Micah, you and I have seen mortal enemies who sit next to each other in the assembly. I mean, it is a time-honored tradition in New Jersey. I don't see that. I just see it as one guy is sort of the Andy Kim-like candidate who is doing his own thing and nobody's going to tell him what to do. And he wants, he's going to go down there. It's going to be on his own terms and completely independent. And, and the other one is more of the traditional organization choice. I view Vinnie Kearney as maybe, maybe the replacement vote for the loss of the organization candidate in the 20th. So that if they could pluck off that seat with him, at least the Union County Democratic delegation in the assembly would remain unchanged as opposed to being -1. I mean, does that make sense?
Yeah, I've not seen, and I'm not too on the inside of this race right now, but I've not seen much evidence of true animosity between the two. I believe I saw an event scheduled for this weekend where two candidates are doing an event with Cory Booker and Andy Kim, which comes on the tail of Andy Kim doing an event with McCurdy a few weeks ago, I think, where he really sang McCurdy's praises, and that's why I like saying that McCurdy is the Andy Kim-esque candidate isn't just something that we're saying. Like, he has ties to Andy Kim, and Andy Kim has lauded him as an example of the leader of the future. But yeah, I think it's hard to know exactly what's going on behind the scenes. But they definitely are two different types of campaigners, and whether or not voters pick up on that, I don't think there's any real way to know until results, and maybe results will even show that. But
Matsukutis and Munoz sort of get along too. It's they do their own thing, but there's really there's no apparent Jersey style animosity there. They're running a joint campaign. The lesson that might be learned here is about the need to raise your own money and not take it for granted. I think, and I'm about to say I hope I don't offend, but clearly I'm about to offend. But it has the added benefit of being true. I think one of Nancy Munoz's liabilities here is she always depended upon the generosity of John Bramnick's fundraising abilities. That her name was on everything, that he ran a joint campaign, that he paid for, he largely paid for himself. He dictated the strategy. He made all these decisions, but it wasn't the money that she was raising to contribute toward that electoral relationship. And I think that might be one of the takeaways as we move forward in this new world order of no lines and primaries and some of these generals is legislators are going to have to step up and take more responsibility for their ability to raise money, not waste it at their legislative office, on things that you can't put on television or in a mailbox. And I think that might be one of the liabilities here is that, not only do they not have Bramnick's name, but they don't have his money either. So now that I've offended Nancy Munoz, we can move on from that. But
okay.
And by the way, I should also point out the Republicans here have a really good team. This is a Harrison Neely, Kean McClellan race. I don't think there's anybody in the state who knows the 21st district better than those two guys, and that I think matters for a couple points in the direction of their clients too. You don't normally see that, right? You don't normally see your selection of your campaign team actually bringing you votes, but I think in this case, it does. They just Harrison's been with 21st district since he was Tom Kane's driver like 20 years ago or something. I mean, that kind of grassroots expertise in knowing what's going on, that means something too. So look, this is it. This is this is what we think our swing area is: District 3, District 8, and District 21. And now remind me, Joey or Zach, where are we supposed to go next?
I mean, so I think what we're going to talk about next, and I think that for everyone's sake, we should spend a little bit less time on each of them. But I mean, next in the slides, I've got District 4, District 11, District 16, District 30, District 36, and District 38, with the shared feature among all of these very, very different districts being that they are Democratic held districts that, for one reason or another, money, partisanship, candidate quality, whatever, Republicans at least have a prayer of winning, but that we don't view as necessarily being sort of like the absolute core playing field. And if Republicans do win, it would be at least a minor upset.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll say about 4 and 11, 16 and 38. These are 4 districts that, these are maybe the 4 districts that both parties, I guess, and 3, that both parties were really, really concerned about and invested in 2023. These are the districts that Democrats, sort of looking at the 2021 results, were thinking to themselves, oh my God, are we going to, sort of lose even more ground here? Like, is this because 4 was redrawn and redistricting to be redder? 11 had just elected 2 Republican assemblywomen, even as it reelected Vin Gopal. 16 and 38 were sort of these perennially kind of competitive districts that felt like they were coming more online and Democrats are freaking out. And then in all 4 of them, Democrats won by quite a bit. I think the margins were maybe closest in LD4 out of those 4. But this is one where, in an environment where Democrats could sort of control the turnout model to some extent. They had a lot more money than the Republicans in all of these races, so they could have much more professional and serious operations. When they had that ability to kind of shape the electorate to their will, they ended up being pretty much totally fine. And I think now the question is, Republicans, in some cases, they're running the same candidates as last time. In some cases, it's new slates. But can, in an environment where Jack Ciattarelli is at the top of the ticket, where the sort of partisan baseline and the turnout model might be a little bit flatter, can they actually make some headway?
Yeah. So tell you what, let's do this. Let's start with 30, because there's no other district like this in the state.
Right. I mean, you look at these maps, and the fact that we're talking about is not only a competitive district, but a district that a Democrat currently holds and is likely to hold again. And you look at these maps, there's like not even a single speck of blue, I guess, other than tiny Lake Como. It's a weird one.
Yeah, I mean, and this is the Lakewood district. This is the Orthodox Jewish district. The outer boroughs of it. But in this case, we're talking specifically about a smaller number in Howell. What I think is interesting here, and I mean, Joey, you get a lot of credit here, because you were writing about this district being in play in February of 23.
I mean, yeah, it was sort of when the Lakewood Orthodox leaders started talking up the idea of making a serious play to get. I mean, their whole gambit was, our voters are very conservative and will vote for Republicans in pretty much every statewide election. They even voted for Ciattarelli in 2021, despite the fact that the sort of top rungs of leadership that year had endorsed Phil Murphy. But it would be really nice in Trenton to have someone in the majority instead, rather than having these three legislators who are all stuck in the minority and can sort of only do whatever negotiating the minority is allowed to do and are ultimately a little bit impotent. I mean, Trenton, the way that the Assembly and Senate are structured, especially the Assembly, because there's no senatorial courtesy, there's just not that much power controlled by an individual minority party legislator. They decided, you know what? I actually think we've got the numbers for to elect someone from our community, an Orthodox Jew from Lakewood, as a Democrat, and then that gives us a seat at the table on the issues that we really care about education funding and these things that are sort of uniquely Lakewood and Lakewood adjacent concerns. And they did it. They got Avi Schnall elected. They looked at the two Republican assemblymen who were there, Sean Keane and Ned Thompson. They decided they liked Ned Thompson less. They sort of unceremoniously dumped him to the curb. This was all actually very late in the election cycle as well. I kind of forgot about this, but they only put Schnall on the ballot in August.
Right.
So they kind of gave Republicans very little. They had lulled Republicans into a false sense of security there, and then suddenly dropped the hammer. And Schnall won by an absurd margin. It was something like 62-38 in the two-way margin between him and Thompson. And so now for me, the question is, I assume that they can replicate that, right? If they could do that once, they can probably do it again. The one sort of unknown factor is that was in a race where there was nothing really all that important at the top of the ticket. And the Orthodox leaders could turn out their voters as they saw fit and tell them how to vote as they saw fit. And it basically worked. With Jack Ciattarelli on the top of the ballot, with a different turnout model, with a lot of voters who are going to the polls who would not necessarily have been activated in a random off-year election, does that look any different for Schnall?
And yeah, sort of building on that, from 2021, when Lakewood leaders didn't have a Schnall, and endorsed Murphy, in fact. From 2021 to 2023, when Schnall was on the ticket, there was something like 5,000 more votes cast in 2023. And I went back and looked, and it was one of 6 towns in the whole state to have more votes cast in 2023 than 2021. And so in a gubernatorial year, when it might be harder to just fully solidify both the Schnall side of things, but also when non-Orthodox Jew Republicans in Howell, Wall, other areas in the district turn out, will the margin just be enough to withstand that higher turnout from the other areas of the district?
Yeah. I mean, look, this is just unique. I mean, you look at you look at Lakewood being lighter red than the rest. That's because the VOD endorsed Phil Murphy, and Chitterelli still won Lakewood. What you're talking about is just, this will be the one down the road where somebody's looking at old legislative manuals in 50 years and wondering, how did this happen? How could this possibly be?
They'll assume it's a mistake.
Yeah.
Or it'll just keep happening.
True.
And then, like South Brooklyn, the Orthodox community in South Brooklyn has been represented by a conservative Orthodox Jewish Democrat on the city council, in the state Senate, in the state assembly, for decades. This was something that I actually, when I was writing about the Lakewood situation before Schnall won, as a New Yorker, I kind of felt like I had a little bit of a secret in on this, where it's like, yeah, you can look at the top lines and say it's Trump plus $1 billion. Yeah. But actually, in this one community, for the most part, block voting is kind of over. Religious leaders and community leaders don't have that impact anymore, except in this one case.
Yeah, and this is the one case because Trump got 88% of the vote in Lakewood, and they're talking about Chitterelli being in that range, and Avi Schnall in that range, and Lakewood. I mean, there are a couple of things about Lakewood politics. A lot of things about Lakewood politics that amaze me. I could see Brian Stack. If he wants, potentially moving to Lakewood, and they would love Brian Stack in Lakewood. And by the way, this is tiny little Orthodox community that not a lot of people know about in Union City, and Brian Stack and the rabbi there are very close. So but the reality here is you've got. You've got these ticket splitters. What they have that is sort of akin to machine politics, and I say that sort of as a in a good way, because this is when machines are just organized to the benefit of their communities. They have something that you don't have in the urban areas. 100% cell phone numbers of their community. Yep. They have sort of this whip system. I was told that when the VOD endorsement went out Saturday night after sundown, you had an ability of this letter, this VOD endorsement letter was hand delivered that night. And then the other thing that just amazes me is the how the population is growing there. Since 2021, the number of registered voters. So I'm not even talking about census. I'm not talking about the fact that they're having 5,000 babies a year in Lakewood, because that's going to take 18 years to begin, really expanding the voting base. But in terms of registered voters, a 23% increase in 4 years. Since that Murphy-Chitterelli race, the number of voters in Lakewood in the Orthodox community has gone up 23%. So, I got to tell you, I sort of look at this as I don't think it's really a question. I think this is sort of going in the direction where Avi Schnall is going to win this. I think the interesting, second chapter of this story is that Sean Keane has played his local politics extraordinarily well. Mm-hmm. And he has survived, because I think if they wanted to take him out, they could take him out. But he's become close to the leadership in Lakewood, and he's for all intents and purposes, you guys tell me if I'm wrong here, Sean Keane today is not as much a Republican as he is an independent.
Do you think the same applies to Senator Robert Singer? Because I know that I believe they all voted for the budget this past year.
Yeah.
But could Robert Singer potentially be vulnerable come 2027?
No, because he was a Lakewood mayor and township committeeman and has had this relationship with the Orthodox community, since the early 80s. I think the big question here is when Bob Singer decides to retire, and maybe it'll be in 2027, maybe not. But who's going to get the Senate seat, and that is a function of where state politics is going to be at that particular moment, and whether Lakewood looks at it and says we'd be better off with a Democratic senator. We've got a lot more to gain if the Democrats are in control of the Senate than we would be having a Republican senator. For those, and by the way, this is easy to forget because it seems like so long ago. Sean Keane was a senator. He had one term in the Senate, and then he got redistricted in a district with Bob Singer, and he had to go back to the assembly, and he's been back there 14 years now. I don't necessarily think there's a path to Sean going back to the Senate. I think it's going to be a function of who they're going to put in, whether Schnall as a Democrat goes to the Senate. There are people out there that I'm sure would like to see Shlomo Shore in the Senate because he's just incredibly popular in his community. There, I just started that rumor that'll travel through.
Going to get him in trouble
through the community quickly. But look, this is Joey. I think what we said in the brief absence is I don't think this is a competitive district.
Yeah, I don't necessarily think so either.
I'd agree with that. I think it's going to go whichever way the community wants it to go, especially in the off-year elections. I mean, the amount of control they have over. Over getting that word out, over the strength of that endorsement, the weight of that endorsement in an off-year election, the legislative only year election, is just going to be unrivaled. You're not going to be able to tap it.
Yeah, and
did my Wi-Fi problems, by the way, cut out the slideshow as well? Should I try to?
Yes, it did. Okay, it did. But we just we have it in our heads that this is a deep red district that has is likely to split in the assembly. I think we've exhausted this.
You mentioned are they independent? Certainly legislatively, they have the room to maneuver, to do what they want to do, to cut, whatever deals with whichever party they want to cut with. And that was exactly what really they intended when they went down this path with Schnall, is to be able to make business with both parties, and I think they can do that now, and I don't think they're in any kind of trouble because if somebody were to even think about challenging in either primary, they're just going to mobilize the community to vote and to block that from happening.
Yeah. Did we mention Ned Thompson's name yet in this whole thing? I don't know that we did.
Yeah, I said his name.
I think once in the history part of it. Yeah.
Yeah, and so here was an incumbent who got knocked out. He's running again to gain his seat. There are some questions as to whether he was even the right Republican to run because of the lingering effects of the dog whistle campaign he ran against the Orthodox Jews 2 years ago. So I don't know. I think this is going to be a big Chitterelli district. I think that number is going to go up because VOD was with Murphy and now the VOD is with Chitterelli. Schnall's going to do his magic, and I think that's just the way it's going to go.
Yeah.
So why don't we go to District 4 and let's see if we can. You guys can shut me up a little bit so that we can move through these a little bit more quickly.
I mean, I would sort of argue in general that of these other districts that we're looking at, 4, 11, 16, 38, 36 is a little bit of a weird case. Like there are individual interesting things in each of them, and I think the dynamics in each are different. You know, some are South Jersey, obviously 4 is South Jersey, 11 is Gopal territory, 16 is sort of, that's Chitterelli's old district, that's kind of suburban Central Jersey, 38 is perennially swingy Bergen County towns. But to me, they all have a relatively similar narrative, which is strong Democratic incumbents who were just sort of tested and proved their mettle in 2023 are running for re-election. The sort of baseline indicators would seem to say that they are favored. And what will really ultimately matter is, what does the top of the ticket look like? You know, in LD4, you can see on this map here, Chitterelli won it by more than, I'm doing the math wrong in my head, by more than 5 percentage points last time. If he does that again, is that a margin that the Democratic incumbents can overcome? Won it by 2.5 percentage points. Again, is that the kind of margin the Democrats could overcome if he gets that again? Over in 36 and 38, these are both Murphy won districts, but they're also Trump won districts, kind of unexpectedly. So if you see Chitterelli sort of matching those Trump numbers in these, I mean, 36 is South Bergen, but it's also got heavily Hispanic areas like Passaic. The district itself is plurality Hispanic. 38 is more Central Bergen, and it's got really diverse towns like Bergenfield and Fair Lawn. If you can see Chitterelli matching the Trump numbers, what does that mean for the Democratic incumbents? So, you know, I will take your suggestions about any individual factors you want to talk about in any of these races, but I think that they can also be somewhat covered with like this overarching narrative of the Democrats are favored because they're just good incumbents with a lot of money. And the only question is, does the top of the ticket screw them over?
Yeah. And, you know, there's some different factors in play in each of these districts. Yet it's sort of the same part. You know, Micah, you tell me if I'm getting this wrong, because I may be. But in the 4th district, you know, that's another one where you know, Norcross is paying close attention. He can't afford to lose 2 assembly seats in the 4th. They're running a real campaign there, not taking anything for granted. You know, recognizing that Washington Township over the last few years is getting redder. Even Gloucester Township. You know, we may be a little. You know, we may not be there yet, but that's trending in that direction also. But you have Norcross watching over District 4. You have Gopal watching over District 11. None of these names on the ballot, by the way. Right. Gopal, I'm told by the Republicans that Gopal's numbers are off the charts good in that district. And there's a reason why it's Gopal on TV saying, vote for my running mates. Because he's got that name there. You know, you go to 16, you know, that might be the one exception here that it's being driven locally. And I think that district, Joe, if you could go to 16 for a second. So that might be, now that's Jack Chitterelli's old legislative district. You know, with some changes, that's Chitterelli's old district. And you know, this could be sort of like what we were saying in 21, where this may be one of those districts where Sherrill potentially could outperform Murphy.
Definitely. I mean, and this is a district that, you know, Chitterelli left it behind in the first place in 2017, in part because he had come pretty close to losing in 2015, and he didn't really want to have to go through that. Like he saw more potential political future for himself as a former assemblyman who sort of retired with dignity than someone who just lost re-election. So this is a district that hasn't really been, I mean, ever since it was redrawn.
Term limited himself. I don't know if you're aware of this. He's term limited himself at every level of every job he's ever had in government. So
right. He reaches offices and then he says, okay, my time here is through.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, this is just a district that hasn't been moving in the right direction for Republicans for a long while. And I think that if you were to, Murphy won it by 5 points. I think if you were to see Sherrill's margin more in the 9 to 12 point range, that wouldn't surprise me at all. This is the exact place where you might see that happen.
And it also wouldn't surprise me if Chitterelli, did a little better than he did last time. This is one of the ones where we'll know in a week where, in less than a week where this is. But look at Hillsborough for people that are watching this map. Look at Hillsborough. I mean, I remember the days where Hillsborough was just, it was a stronghold, and for Republicans, and it went a little bit for Chitterelli, but it also went for Harris. Hillsborough, Republicans are still in control locally, but Hillsborough is a swing town, and Roy Fryman is from there, and he's a good legislator. He's a really good legislator in terms of constituent service and working on local issues. So I think you're going to see, I don't necessarily think this is overly competitive for the assembly. And they don't, by the way, they don't have the money there. I mean, they just don't have those financial resources that they did in the days where Dale Florio and Luke Gray before him and Jack Penn were county chairs. They don't have that ability to run that kind of campaign. But Montgomery has changed. It is getting bluer. That used to be pretty solid. You can't win this district off of Reddington. But anyway, that was the outlier. And then when you go to 36 and 38, you've got Paul Sarlo watching 36, and Sarlo is sort of that throwback to the days where, and by the way, so is Gary Scher. They won this district when this was a swing district, when this was, a Republican held, and we're flipping seats, and it was going back and forth. And I mean, Sarlo, in his, he came in appointed, and then he beat John V. Kelly when it had Nutley in that district. That was not easy. So you're talking about people that know how to win elections. Sarlo's watching this because he doesn't need a Republican assemblyman thinking they could be a senator. This is to me entirely different than the presidential maps, because Gary Scher is not losing Passaic, and Clinton Calabrese isn't going to come close to losing Cliffside Park. But anyway, I'm straying. You've got Sarlo watching it, and then in 38 you've got Joe Logano watching it. As a team with Paul Giuliano, who keeps a closer eye on local politics than anything else. So,
and you've got, the actual incumbents, Lisa Swain and Chris Mulley, kind of like in 36. But both of these districts are very well geographically. You sort of got these anchors where Lisa Swain can pull you up in Fairlawn, and Chris Tully can pull you up in Bergenfield, and Joe Logano can pull you up in Paramus.
Yeah, and
the problem in both of them is that if Trump's performance is the best case scenario, it's probably not quite enough, right? They've got to. It's ironically a situation where they've got to do better than Trump. They can't just aspire to Trump and try to get. They've got to actually overcome do better than Trump. So it seems to be a real challenge. I know they're making a serious play in Bergen, and if Jack gets a big vote in Bergen, that's the scenario in which they could do better. But I think they've got a tall ladder to climb here.
It's hard. They've got good candidates. Bob Kaiser is a councilman in Paramus, former police officer, and I think it was South Hackensack, and Barry Wilkes ran last time. Likable, enormously likable guy. But this is the one we're going to look at on election night, and I wouldn't be surprised if I think unlike 21 and 16, it's possible that Chitterelli goes up and not down in this district. It's possible that he's not. Joey will remind me anything's possible. These things can happen. But I think you're just because Chitterelli goes up a little bit doesn't mean that he's going to carry anybody in.
Right.
On the other hand, it depends how much he goes up. I could see any combination of things going. We lost Joey for a second, but I'm sure he'll be back. So that's, that's what you've got you've got the, the guardian angels of Norcross and Gopal and Norcross, Gopal, Sarlo and Lagana watching out over this. Joe Lagana doesn't want to have to run against, Assemblyman Barry Wilkes in a Senate race in 2 years. So they're heavily invested in these things.
And in a different context, Joey and I have talked about just I'm going to talk about Nellie Poe for a second, just because we've got Passaic in this district. How the real threat to a Nellie Poe may not be in the midterm turnout; it may be in the presidential turnout. And I think the same could be true here, where this is the presidential sort of the high watermark, and the threat is not coming when you don't get the presidential only voters out.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. I think you're right. So we did 4, 11, 30, 36, 38. These are Republican targets, and we could have any number of outcomes there, but I'll tell you, overall, to me, I sort of sense that if you don't see Chitterelli make some gains overall in this category of legislative
That's right.
district,
Yep.
that again makes things a little bit tougher for him. And we're talking about 16 and 21 maybe being a little bit friendlier to Sherrill than they were to Murphy, and I think we're talking about 4, 36, 38, certainly 30 as being an area where Chitterelli can go. Do we have anything more on these districts, or should we go on to the next level?
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think so.
So these are sort of like the Democratic targets. These are the ones that if Mikey Sherrill catches lightning in a battle on Tuesday, you could see some shockers. I'm not sure, but I think District 2, I think Guardian, you're talking about Guardian and Swift being favored. Again, the Republicans won this district even with South Jersey Democrats putting a ton of money in it in the last 2 elections. Now they're not spending money, so I think 2 is Joe. Yeah, let's see if we can put that one up. But
also, I apologize for keeping on dipping in and out. I can't even blame it on like Comcast or anything. It's because I had my computer charger kept on brushing up against the power button on my power strip, and I kept on turning off the power that connected to my Wi-Fi. So entirely my fault. But I'm back and I've unplugged my computer, so it won't be.
Yeah. I just want to point out that Micah and I, who are a lot older, we're doing fine on the tech here. We really are.
Right. And yet somehow when I come back, the slideshow is never being shown. So somehow I think that perhaps there are skills that I do possess.
And you know what? As long as we took this brief, generational detour, Zach, just in case you don't know, on your wall, that's called a phone jack. And they used to put something called a landline on literally a landline on the wall. And
I'll tell you what, David, I did an Inside Edge a little while ago where I've lived here more than a year now. I had no idea what that was until I did my Inside Edge, and someone in the replies was like, "Why do you have a phone jack on your wall?" I was like, "Oh, that's what that is."
Yeah, I mean, you don't see it that often. But anyway, District 2, despite the Norcross-Palestina radio debate, I think I don't think Norcross has a gripe with Don Guardian. Norcross, I think, would back Don Guardian in a Senate primary if he needed to against Palestina. Not that Guardian is saying that he would do that. But I think 2 is looking to be in good shape. If we can go, Joey, to 25, since I don't know how to do this on my own.
There it is.
This is another one. I mean, it was a little closer than people thought it would be last time, and I'm not talking about just the Chitterelli Murphy numbers were much closer than people thought it would be, but in the let me pull up the 23 Senate race. I mean, Bucco won.
It was like 53 to 47 for Bucco, and then
So
it was even closer for the assembly.
Yeah, so this
this seems like a place where this is mostly Mikey Sherrill's congressional district.
Yes,
not quite entirely, but mostly. And so I kind of think if there is a single place where she is going to have serious coattails, this district feels like the place where it might be. But I mean, even then, I don't know if she's going to win this district, right? In a national election, Kamala Harris versus Donald Trump still won it by half a point. So in a state level election, there's, it could still go red, and that might be just sort of lights out for the Republicans. But if Cheryl's having a pretty good night, and especially if she's having a good night in sort of her home territory, then suddenly this district comes super online. And the kind of irony about that is that the legislative candidates that she would be sort of pulling over the finish line with her are people who ran with Steve Fulop in the primary.
Right.
Right.
But by the way, because that is, that's like the asterisk on this race that always needs some explaining is that the 2 candidates that Fulop recruited were entirely acceptable to the Morris County Democratic Organization. Right. And one of them is a Morristown councilman, the other, sort of seen as a rising star. But you can't discount. I mean, Ora Dunn is a full-time legislator. She works this district pretty hard. If there's any place where a incumbent is developing an independent identity, it might be, it might be there. And then Kristen Barranco comes out of, he's from Jefferson in the northern part of this district, but he's a labor guy. He's IBEW, and he's the building, one of the, you've got Latham Tiver in the Senate, and you've got Chris Barranco in the Assembly. I don't necessarily think they're going to lose him without a fight either. This could be a surprise. We've seen surprises in this district before. They don't have Bucco on the ticket with them, and Bucco is the marquee name. And I don't think Ora Dunn's ever run, in this district, without Bucco. So, it's sort of a District 21 thing. This will be one to watch in the Assembly, and this, this could easily split. You're talking about, voters here that can figure out how to split their ballots.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that LD4 is the top of my list for if Republicans were going to score an upset somewhere, and I think LD25 would be the top of my list for if Democrats were going to score an upset somewhere.
Yeah. And then we go to 39.
But I will say the last thing on no, it's okay. I'll just say on 25 and in Morris County generally, Republicans are doing a good advance vote game there. I mean, they're the early vote, they're cranking out 4,000 votes a day in the advance vote. So, they're not taking it for granted by any means.
So this is, I mean, again, just to sum it up, this is a district where we have no idea, right? I mean, Cheryl could win it. I wouldn't be surprised if Cheryl won it comfortably. I wouldn't be surprised if Chitterelli won it comfortably. I wouldn't be surprised if they were, the incumbents through their own strength just sort of hold on regardless of whichever way that goes. So, but if there's going to be an upset that people really aren't seeing coming on Tuesday in the Assembly, this could very well be it, right? Because we know that 3 and 8 and 21, we know that they're on the chopping block. This one, this one would surprise me more than District 2. So why don't we go to 39? This is sort of the bridesmaids district. People are always talking about this. This district's going to flip. I keep saying, and Zach and I were talking about this district the other night. With whatever changes are going on, whatever primaries and infighting on the Republican side, and you can track this lineage of Republican wars in Bergen County, to these factions 100 years ago, more than 100 years ago. I will spare all of you the Ralph Chandless War stories of this part of Bergen County, but the reality is Democrats haven't won this district since 1977, and Democrats this is a district where they've got they've got one of the organization's got one of their own, and they got one of Fulop's people, and they don't particularly care for Fulop's guy. There are those in the Bergen County Democratic Organization who would just rather lose it entirely than have somebody that they they don't really want there. Authen is a proven vote getter, even though he's had his obstacles with some other Republicans. This is a weird one in the sense that I think Chitterelli might go up here. Wouldn't shock me if Cheryl did. This is a swing district, but it's hard for me to say the Democrats are in the mix to win an assembly race when Democrats don't really care if they win it or not. Is that fair?
Well, I mean, there were several districts that were like that in 2023.
Yeah.
I don't think Democrats were particularly invested in any of 21, 25, or 39. Then they all ended up being kind of close. So I do think that sort of you always have to take the underlying partisanship of these districts into account when you remember that, again, as I said before, we can talk about swing voters all day long, but most voters in New Jersey and in anywhere are straight ticket voters for one part or the other. And that's just, they will come to the polls, they are a Democrat or they are a Republican, and they will vote for their party. And so that provides at minimum a baseline for Democrats in these districts and the Republicans in sort of their more reach districts that, in the perfect storm could be sort of built off of.
Yeah.
And I think what Joey said at the outset about the top of the band, the very top of the band for Cheryl, the top of the possibility for Cheryl, if she were to win, I think you said it by 12, Joey, was what you saw? Yeah. I mean, if she were to win by 12.
That was what her super PAC had her up by. So we do have a poll that sort of shows that as a possibility.
Yeah, exactly. You can see the scenario where it happens. I mean, she just opens up the unaffiliated vote. They're breaking her way. Some of the polling has shown that it breaks her way. It doesn't break decisively her way, but it breaks her way. And if she were to get to 12, which is not on anybody's bingo card, but if she were to get to 12, then this is the kind of district that gets into play then.
Yeah, and I got to tell you, I don't see a scenario. Feel free to disagree with me, but I don't see a scenario where Jack Chitterelli can lose the 39th and win the governorship.
Because I think that's true for most of these. Right. Like, I think if he's losing any of the 39th, the 25th, and I guess that's the only two that really apply here. But
second,
I guess the second, and maybe like the 40th and the 26th are sort of one step even further than that. If he's like really struggling in any of those, then the statewide coalition just probably isn't there.
Yeah, and this is one of these districts where both parties understand that they it's not just about winning the district, because these aren't, we don't have the electoral college. It doesn't matter which legislative district you win or lose, but it's predictive of how you'll do in other parts of the state. More importantly, for both parties, they don't want to leave votes on the table, and the Chitterelli getting a bigger turnout out of Mahwah than than would normally happen without that push is leaving votes on the table. It's the same for Sherrill in some of these towns too. This is one of these places, and you haven't, we haven't talked about, and we're not going to talk about all these non-competitive districts, but they're also mining for margins in some of these places, and they have the ability to increase this turnout. If Sherrill wins this district, it's because the Bergen County Republican organization continues to suck and has no ability to actually run an operation other than what will normally happen, whether they were there or not there.
Which is part of why I think that they're so prominently pushing that. I mean, for example, the Alpine councilman who switched to support Chitterelli from the Democratic Party, and I don't think he will swing many votes, frankly. But they're just trying to run that because try to get any semblance of a margin up there.
Yeah. So that's I think that's it. There are we should just go briefly say that and you're gonna I don't want to recite the voter guide, or there won't be a lot for you to read, but you look at places like District 1 that have been flipped over the last few years, and we're going to look at we'll probably talk at some point about what will be the effect of so many safe seats on the fact that turnout might be depressed, and votes are left on the table because down ballot doesn't have the they're not incentivized to spend money and build these ground organizations too. Are there any other legislative districts anybody wants to talk about? But
I mean, I think there are a ton that were interesting in the primary, and we talked about them during the primary. Yeah. I think that as you said, most districts in the state are safe. So that means that the legislators have an entirely separate set of concerns than the ones that we've been talking about in these swing districts. But now with the death of the county line, it's not quite like there's just one class of legislators that have to worry about themselves and another class that don't have to care at all. Now both classes sort of have to worry about themselves just from different angles. So I'm kind of curious to see how that changes the vibes of the legislature. And, like we've been talking about, well, what if, a Democratic assembly, what if Andrea Katz challenges Latham Tiber in 2027? But there's also the question of, what if one of these Democratic assembly members in a safe seat that we're not really thinking about decides to run against their incumbent senator in 2027 because the line is gone? And there's just all kinds of new considerations with that, but that's sort of for another time.
Yeah. So, I think, read the voter guide. I think you'll understand why we're not talking about 1 or 14 anymore, or, it's just, and the Hudson was high drama in the primary and not at all in the general. 40 was the one that I know there was a point where some people talked about it being in the bubble, but Ron Arnaud turned out to be an incredibly flawed candidate, and I think he his campaign essentially folded in the summer, and that never got off the ground. And I'll as we begin to bring it to a close, unless any of the three of you are thinking anything that we haven't gotten to, is I got to a point where I wanted to see how long it was, and that was like 2 hours ago. So we are at 3 hours and 6 minutes, and 2 names have not come up, and that is Dale Caldwell and Jim Gannon. And
one of them will soon be the one heartbeat away from the governorship.
Right. And here we are on a 3-hour live stream talking about politics in New Jersey, and we haven't discussed them at all. And the only place where I just want to sort of interject this is as you look at Morris County, and Joey, can you put that first map up again? Though it might be just too small to do, but Morris County was I think it was an 11-point victory for. I mean, I can pull this up.
It was 11, yeah.
It was 11, and it was like 16,000 votes for Morris County. Went 16,000 for Chitterelli. This is why Jim Gannon's on the ticket, is to prevent leakage from Chitterelli's Morris County numbers. They are, banking on the fact that Gannon will save them from some defections. That they're gonna stick with Chitterelli, who they sort of like, because he's running with their sheriff, who they really like, against the congresswoman from the other party, who they also like. So I think when you talk about Morris County as a cog to this whole thing, you're sort of figuring out why Gannon's there. But
Cheryl was very concerned about the powerful Centenary University voter alum voter.
Yeah, but I got to tell you, Dale.
Caldwell, this is just me goofing around. I mean, Caldwell.
Yeah.
I think that one thing about
he's turned out to be a fine running mate.
Yeah, they're both smart and affable guys. They both handle themselves basically well during their one debate, and give or take a sort of unwise line of taxes from Gannon that made its way into some ads.
Yeah.
And I am of the general belief that if we're going to have a system like New Jersey does, where the governor single-handedly picks the lieutenant governor, that lieutenant governor then just sort of sits around and holds their cabinet position and does the real work of that cabinet position. Right now the lieutenant governor is Tahisha Way. She's got her hands actually full, like administering the state's elections. I kind of don't mind if the lieutenant governor is a basically unflashy, sort of well-liked bureaucrat type who will then hold that office and do the job they need to do. And when the governor calls on them to do it, they can lead the state and nothing will catch on fire. And that's fine. And I think that Caldwell and Gannon are both fit that bill really well.
Yeah. And, I will, I'll be bold enough to make a prediction that the New Jersey legislature will never pass a bill that puts the lieutenant governor as the presiding, officer of the state Senate, the way a number of states have. That will never ever happen. No. But
primarily because when you think about it, the reason one of the biggest reasons we established the office in the first place, other than the fact that we had the parade of acting governors for so long, was because the acting governor was tied to the legislature. This was a separation from the legislature. So I really don't see us putting it back together.
Yeah.
We've separated the office from the legislature.
Well, I will leave you with this nerd thought, which is just, chances are greater than zero, but not much greater than zero. I learned this while writing an appellate brief, involving the Election Law Enforcement Commission. I think I may have known this, but I never really thought about it. So gubernatorial candidates are capped at $18.5 million in spending on the hard side. And they are, because you got to love how Jersey does its rules, they could overspend by 100,000 and skirt any major penalties. But if they overspend by more than $100,000, there is a mechanism that would deny the winner of the gubernatorial election the opportunity to serve, to be the governor. A lot of things would have to happen. You'd have to have, judges taking statutes a little more literally than they do. But in that case, this is why we're in the final days. This is where the CFOs, the controllers of the gubernatorial candidates start to. This is where they're losing sleep, because they've got to control this huge amount of spending without going over. It's sort of like The Price is Right. You go over, you lose. and bills come in. I mean, Micah, you've been in these campaigns too.
Yeah.
Bills come in and people are like, where the hell did this come from? Who approved this? How are we going to do it? We didn't budget for this. What are we going to do? And they don't have Derek Green, so they're not going to get, one of these big expensive bills that was produced on the eve of election. But it happens. I just want to point out to everybody that if a candidate for governor were ever denied a certificate of election because they overspend their cap, Nicholas Scutari is the governor of New Jersey and the president of the Senate. And until there's a special election in 2026, I don't have any reason to think that's going to happen. But I think if I know this, I owe it to the literally thousands of people still watching us. I owe it to give everybody something that they, unlikely to have known before the start of it. You stick with us for 3 hours and 13 minutes. You have learned the path to the governorship of Nick Scutari, and chances are greater than zero. So,
and it will be next year and next season in House of Cards.
Could you imagine? I mean, I'm sorry. I guess I get a little punchy toward the end of these, but can you imagine a scenario by which the winner of a gubernatorial election has approached that line of overspending, and Oria from ELEC is actually deciding who the next governor might be?
And if you want to get really Machiavellian about it, you do some business with the campaign. You wait to submit the bill until the very end, right? Yeah.
Well, look. We all know this, right? We all know that the cap is a little bit of a joke because, and it used to be more serious than it is because, oh, sure, we'll hold our spending to $18.5 million. And now, it's been happening for, over a month. They're directing their donors to the super PACs. Pre-Citizens United, that cap was like a serious number.
Yeah.
Now it's just sort of this adorable little, figure that they have to deal with on their books. We all know that if this were serious, right? If anybody came close to approaching the cap, they would all get paid. They just wouldn't get paid out of blank for governor. So
right.
That's it, I guess. We should let's go around and Micah, Joey, Zach, give your anything anything you want to say for the good of the Republic. Now is your opportunity.
Well, read the voter guide.
Yeah, there you go.
That's all I've got.
We can't keep on telling people to read something that we have not, in fact, yet published.
Yes.
When it comes out tomorrow, read it.
Yeah.
I think the two races, I'm not suggesting reopening the floor, that I'll be watching that we haven't talked about are the Jersey City mayor's race, the Hoboken mayor's race. Again, I think they're going to drive turnout for Cheryl, obviously having so many candidates. And I'll be watching them closely, not least of which because my former boss is running for mayor.
Yeah, you're right, and those are huge races, and Jersey City because it's the second largest city, and Hoboken because it's one of those places in New Jersey that has been viewed as more important than maybe it should be, in terms of size. But it's certainly a prestigious community. It's why we look at things like this. I just thought of this just now, and let's not talk about this very long. But in a close governor's race, isn't it possible that you can say that Steve Fulop puts Mikey Sherrill over because he's the one who decided to move Jersey City from May to November and changing the turnout model in Hudson County. If this is a really tight race, Mikey Sherrill might have to thank Steve Fulop in her victory speech, which
and doubly so because he's the one who left the vacancy this year, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
All right. Well, thanks everybody. We're coming back next.
My quick
Yeah, go ahead, Joey. Yeah.
I mean, I feel like I always say something to this effect on these live streams, but just sort of embrace the unknown. I kind of gave that deliberately wide range of variables at the very beginning of this, where it's Chitterelli +3 to Sherrill +12, and you mean, who knows? Maybe it could blow even past those, because we don't really know what's going to happen. We have, as always, our indicators that tell us how we think things might go. I actually think that people have been a lot better about sort of understanding the uncertainties involved here than they were in some previous elections, especially 2021. People went into 2021 feeling pretty confident that things were going to look one way, and only that one way. And then when they didn't, people were sort of everyone was caught flat-footed. And maybe because of that, people are much better prepared, partially for what if Chitterelli overperforms again, but just more generally for the polls are giving us one indication, but we don't really know. The spending in the legislative races is telling us something about what the parties think, but they could be wrong. I think everybody has, or most people have, sort of a better recognition of that this time. But even with that, I would still just encourage everybody to go into election night. I would encourage everybody to go into election day, if you haven't already voted, into the voting booth and actually, make your voice heard on who should be the next governor, who should control the legislature. And then on election night, when you're watching the results come in, just anticipate the unanticipatable.
And for those who don't know, I'm sorry, I'm going to mention one other thing. We should have a much quicker count this time. So one of those unexpected should not be that we're waiting for days to get a count.
Yeah,
right. We were looking at the 2024 election. We knew what even races that were quite close, we knew approximately what those races looked like by the early morning hours of the day after election day. And I would think that this year, unless there's some major snafu somewhere, should be basically the same.
Yeah. And I'll just give my usual, the way I usually close these, which is just to remind everybody, that to take responsibility for their own ballot. Go on the Division of Elections website if you don't already have it. Sign up for a Track My Ballot account if you voted by mail, which is a growing number, and make sure that it's been received. If it doesn't show up as having been received, don't panic. You can, call your county election office. They will walk you through it. You go to the polling place, you vote provisionally. If your ballot comes in, that's fine. No harm done. If your ballot doesn't come in, then you're voting. Counties are sometimes late in posting that information. It's not real time, that these ballots just appear, but take responsibility and tell everybody, who voted by mail to watch their ballot. And then, I always close it the same way, which is, if you are still sitting with a ballot on your kitchen table and you haven't put it, filled it out yet, do not, under any circumstances, no matter what, put it in a mailbox. Mailboxes make it more like mailboxes are the second cause of disenfranchised voters in New Jersey. The first being the Motor Vehicle Commission. And don't trust the U.S. Postal Service with your ballot. There are drop boxes all over the place.
David, you're saying at this stage of the game, you're not saying this is not general advice across the board. Don't ever put. You're saying now, this late in the game, don't put. Yeah.
Today, if you haven't voted by now, don't use the post office. And if you voted within the last week, just get that check the ballot. Check my ballot. Account. It's free. It's private. And just take responsibility for your own ballot. Anyway, thanks for everybody. We hope to do 3 hours, and we're 3:21, and for us that is better than we usually do. So thank you everybody for watching, and we will be back next Thursday night with either looking very smart or not as much. So have a good night, everybody. If you're working on campaigns, don't take any time off this weekend, and we'll see you next week. Good night, everybody.